In the magical realm of Alnith, a war rages on between the mortals, who have limited lifespans, and the immortals, who possess regeneration abilities. The war's outcome hinges on a decisive battle between the two mightiest warriors on each side, Graham, the heroic human, and Veltal, the demon lord who leads the immortals. Under normal circumstances, such a clash would be hopeless for the mortals, given Veltal's immortality. However, wielding the holy sword, Graham delivers a powerful strike that somehow bypasses Veltal's regenerative powers, resulting in his defeat. As Veltal faces his demise, he commends the hero for overcoming him, though he harbors bitterness over losing to a mere mortal. In his final moments, he vows to return and exact his revenge, then vanishes from the world. Centuries later, Veltal awakens once again. Greeted by his loyal servant Makina, who kneels before him, she reveals that she has waited 500 years for his return and apologizes for her informal attire. Veltal reassures her that it's of no concern. He's simply relieved she succeeded in performing his reincarnation ritual to restore him to life. Yet, he remains unaware of their exact location and eagerly plans to resume his conquest of Alnith. However, Makina informs him that much has changed in the 500 years since his fall. About 80 years ago, a catastrophe fused Alnith with Earth, causing 90% of the population to perish, dismantling national governments, and leaving cities to operate as independent states. Although some conflicts have erupted, relative peace has settled over the world. The merging of Earth's advanced technology with Alnith's magitech has spurred rapid development. Makina leads Veltal to the surface, revealing the transformed world, and he marvels at the advancements. But in his astonishment, he becomes distracted and nearly collides with a passerby, prompting Makina to push him aside. Apologizing for his lapse in attention, Veltal grows indignant at the notion that someone would dare to brush past Makina, one of the 6 dark peers, without recognizing her significance. Determined to rekindle fear among these heedless mortals, he raises his hand to the sky. Makina, realizing his intention, warns him against it, but it's already too late. Veltal casts a spell, creating a massive hole in the clouds above. To his surprise, the reaction is underwhelming. People appear more annoyed than frightened, and an alarm sounds shortly after. Makina explains that using grand magic within the city limits is forbidden, and they must flee to avoid trouble. Veltal is reluctant to retreat, finding it cowardly, but reluctantly complies with Makina's urging. As they depart, Veltal notices a figure bearing a striking resemblance to the hero Graham. With no opportunity to confront him, Veltal is pulled away by Makina. Once they've escaped danger, Makina sits with Veltal, explaining that following his death, the immortals were forced to sign a ceasefire with the mortals, ending the war. But when the worlds merged, the citizens of the immortal kingdom were scattered across the globe. It wasn't long before major industries began persecuting the immortals, deeming them unworthy of human rights, and hunting them to near extinction. Veltal takes a moment to grasp that his people have been nearly wiped out. He then asks about the whereabouts of the other 5 dark peers. Makina shares that the fates of May, Silwald, and Ralsheen remain unknown. But tragically, Zenol is confirmed dead. He had sacrificed himself as a decoy, allowing Makina to escape from the hunters, all in the name of Veltal. Zenol's loyalty had been unwavering, and Veltal feels grateful for such a devoted follower. However, there is one more peer Veltal wishes to know about: Marcus. Makina hesitates, trying to deflect the conversation by asking if Veltal is thirsty. When he declines, she makes an excuse to get a drink and steps away. While Makina is gone, Veltal notices a live broadcast playing on a large screen, though he's puzzled by its nature. Suddenly, several lights appear, seemingly controlled by a girl standing on a nearby rooftop. She flicks her wrist, and in an instant, the screens display hub videos. Pleased with herself, she starts to leave, but Veltal calls out to her, catching her off guard. She tries to feign innocence, but Veltal, having noticed her manipulation of the surrounding ether, is not fooled. The girl, surprised that anyone could detect her actions through the ether, asks who Veltal is. When he introduces himself as the Demon Lord, she scoffs, not taking him seriously. Veltal explains that while he saw her do something to the giant screens, He doesn't understand the technique behind it and seeks to learn more from someone as skilled as she is. The girl feels flattered that Veltol considers her an expert on the matter, so she eagerly begins explaining how what she did was just basic hacking. She boasts that leaking the Pokemon files was much more challenging in comparison. What she had just pulled off involved exploiting a critical flaw in the billboard's logic barrier and then slipping in some provocative videos just for fun. Veltol, interrupting her speech, tells her he's searching for one of his subordinates, named Marcus, and asks if she knows where he can find him. She points toward the towering structure in the city's center, indicating that the CEO of the company there is named Marcus, and suggests he may be the person Veltol is looking for. Following her advice, Veltol heads over to Heavy Magic Industries in search of Marcus. As he steps inside, he notices a peculiar-looking creature wiggling at him, but dismisses it and approaches the front desk, announcing that he's there to meet Marcus. Before he can even finish speaking, Marcus's private secretary arrives and offers to escort him to Marcus. They both board the elevator to the top floor, and during the ascent, Veltol notices a pin on the secretary's outfit resembling the strange creature he saw earlier. When he asks about it, she proudly explains that it's the company mascot, soon to become the face of a new brand. Upon reaching the top of the tower, Veltol finds Marcus seated on a grand throne. Marcus acknowledges that it has been a long time since they last met, but Veltol takes offense at Marcus's refusal to stand in the presence of his king. Marcus, however, ignores the remark and bluntly asks what brings Veltol there. Veltol states his intention to recruit Marcus's help in rebuilding the Immortal Kingdom. Marcus bursts into laughter, mocking the suggestion for a full minute before dismissing the idea outright. Insulted, Veltol prepares to teach Marcus a harsh lesson. But before he can cast a spell, Marcus's assistant attacks with a blade, forcing Veltol to dodge. Stunned by the assistant's proficiency in armament forging magic, Veltol prepares to counter. But Marcus instructs her to stand down. Turning back to Veltol, Marcus points out that he's grown weak. In his prime, Veltol would have never been threatened by magic of that caliber. He questions how Veltol plans to conquer the world when a mere human can pose such a challenge, and flatly refuses to serve a king who has become so pitiful. He then orders Veltol to leave, or he will make him. Enraged, Veltol starts to cast a spell to strike Marcus down, but before he can complete it, Marcus uses a spellbreaker, leaving Veltol in disbelief. Marcus had never been skilled enough to outmatch him in magic. Smirking, Marcus reveals that he has been waiting for this confrontation for years and takes pleasure in informing Veltol that his power is now a relic of the past. He then reveals an implant on the back of his neck. Unfamiliar with the device, Veltol watches as Marcus pulls up an instructional video explaining its capabilities. The device, known as a familia, allows users to bypass 3 of the 5 steps usually required for magic: initialization, construction, and expansion. This means that now, anyone can wield high-level magic effortlessly. Marcus adds that even if Veltol is contemplating getting a familia himself, it's impossible because the device is designed to be incompatible with higher beings like him. Though Veltol's natural spellcasting speed is extraordinary, it pales in comparison to the AI-driven spellcasting facilitated by the familia, making his abilities seem as slow as sending spells by mail. Veltol demands to know why Marcus is doing this, and Marcus explains that he has despised Veltol from the moment they met. Veltol was tyrannical, arrogant, and worst of all, his skills backed up his arrogance, leaving Marcus powerless to challenge him back then. But now, everything has changed. Marcus tells Veltol that it's time for him to leave and launches multiple blood swords in his direction. Unable to evade them all, Veltol is pierced several times and sent crashing out of the tower's window. Having long dreamt of this victory, Marcus declares himself the new Demon Lord. With that matter settled, his secretary eagerly brings up the promotional ideas for the company mascot. Marcus dismissively instructs her to present them at the next planning meeting. Meanwhile, Veltol lands harshly back in the city, struggling with his slower regeneration. As he attempts to stagger back onto the street, he accidentally collides with a passerby, which escalates into a brawl that Veltol promptly loses. He ends up lying in a heap of trash, wondering why he keeps falling to mortals like Graham before. Eventually, Makina finds him and gets him onto a train. She apologizes for hesitating to reveal Marcus's betrayal, acknowledging that her delay resulted in Veltal's disgrace. He reassures her that there is no need to apologize, as he would have wanted to confirm the truth himself regardless. When the train arrives at their destination, Makina guides Veltal to the apartment building where she lives and informs him that this is her home. Veltal initially assumes she owns the entire building, but she leads him into a modest room, explaining that it's her actual living space. At first, he thinks she must be joking, but Makina is earnest. This small room is all she can afford on her salary. Realizing that Makina has endured such humble living conditions all this time while waiting for his return, Veltal pulls her close and thanks her, vowing never to forget the loyalty she has shown him. Centuries ago, Makina faced persecution from the people of her era, who, upon discovering her immortality, blamed her for their woes and resolved to cast her into a volcano. Just as she was about to hit the molten lava, Veltal appeared out of nowhere and rescued her. It was their first encounter, and Veltal had come simply because he'd heard of another immortal in the vicinity. When he first laid eyes on Makina, he was not disappointed. He offered her the chance to devote herself, body and soul, to him. From that day onward, Makina remained steadfastly loyal to Veltal. Makina wakes up to the sound of her alarm and heads to the kitchen to prepare breakfast before Veltal rises. While waiting for the soup to boil, she calls on her virtual assistant, Ilek. A miniature version of herself appears in her field of vision, giving a rundown of the date, time, and current weather. Makina asks Ilek how she's doing, prompting the assistant to run a full diagnostic check and report that everything is functioning perfectly. Though that's good news, it wasn't exactly what Makina was asking for. After finishing up breakfast, she goes to wake Veltal and serves him the meal. Though he has never seen food like this before, the aroma alone tells him it's going to taste fantastic. He picks up the chopsticks and, as expected, finds the food delicious, which brings Makina great happiness. After he's finished eating, Veltal asks if Makina knows the whereabouts of any other immortals. She does know of a few who managed to evade the immortal hunts, but in recent times, immortals have begun disappearing, including two of her close aides, Ornard and Pomlock. Though she hopes they've merely gone into hiding, she can't be sure due to the lack of contact. Veltal inquires whether the immortal hunts still occur, but Makina explains that they actually ended decades ago. The hunts had been initiated by Marcus to secure his position of power, but now that he has it all, there is no longer any reason to continue. Furthermore, public resentment toward immortals has waned over the years, making it relatively safe for them to be seen in public. After her aides disappeared, Makina visited their apartment, finding the place in disarray, suggesting a struggle. The only clue she found was a note with the words "Immortal Furnace" written on it. As Veltal reads the note, he reaches for his tea, but a sudden sharp pain causes him to flinch, spilling the liquid everywhere. It appears he still hasn't fully healed from the injuries sustained the previous day. And it's not just his regeneration that has weakened. His entire power set has diminished. Even the spell he cast when he first arrived would have had a much more significant effect if he were at full strength. Makina attributes this decline to the fact that the faith that once fueled Veltal's power no longer exists. Now, he is merely a figure in history books without the recognition that once bolstered him. Undeterred, Veltal believes that restoring his powers should be straightforward. He just needs to make himself known again. With that decision made, he tells Makina he wants to get out and explore the surrounding area, as idling around is not good for him. Makina suggests they go shopping in the city, starting with getting Veltal a proper set of street clothes. They walk into a store, and she asks him to step onto a platform for a 3D body scan. She apologizes for their budget constraints, limiting them to affordable store clothes. But Veltal assures her it doesn't matter, as his natural beauty will make any attire look good. After his measurements are taken, she asks if he has any preferences, but Veltal, unfamiliar with the current era's fashion, leaves the choice to Makina. Makina decides to consult Ilek for the most practical and budget-friendly option for Veltal. After some processing, Ilek suggests a tracksuit. Though Makina doubts the choice, Veltal is instantly taken with it, especially intrigued by the design on the back. Makina explains that the symbols are from an old language once spoken by the people who lived in the area and that they spell out Demon Lord. Since Veltal likes it, she takes the tracksuit for him and heads for the exit, but he calls her back, pointing out that they haven't paid yet. Makina reassures him that all transactions are handled automatically. Later, they grab some food at a fast food place, and while they sit together, Veltal asks Makina about having a familia installed. Despite Marcus's betrayal, the familia is undoubtedly a groundbreaking device, and Veltal is curious about it. Makina explains that it's extremely convenient, allowing not only easier magic use but also access to information, shopping, and communication. Before familias became mainstream, people relied on smartphones for such tasks, which was cumbersome because they had to hold the device. Intrigued, Veltal asks to take a closer look at Makina's familia. He turns her around and begins examining the implant, causing her to flinch slightly at first, though she quickly finds herself enjoying the attention so much that her familia warns her about her spiking heart rate. When Veltal finishes, he asks whether it isn't uncomfortable to have the device embedded in the back of her neck. Makina admits that it felt strange initially, but she adapted, especially after laws were passed preventing companies from streaming ads directly into people's heads. Although it's difficult to navigate daily life without a familia now, having one doesn't necessarily improve one's quality of life, as her current living situation demonstrates. As they walk home, Veltal suddenly declares that he's going to get a job. Makina is caught off guard and tells him that he doesn't need to stoop to something as mundane as working. While her living conditions may not be ideal at the moment, she promises that she'll improve their situation soon. She even offers to pick up more shifts or take on 2 or 3 additional jobs if necessary. However, Veltal cuts her off, pointing out that times have changed, he's no longer the all-powerful being he once was, and he needs to adapt to the new reality. Most importantly, he wouldn't feel right just sitting around while Makina works to provide him with food, clothing, and shelter. Without his duties as king, he needs something to occupy himself with. But that doesn't mean he has given up on his ambition to conquer the world. He then asks Makina if she is still willing to serve him, and she swears to stand by his side for the rest of her life. Later that day, as Veltal prepares to head out in search of a job, Makina insists on accompanying him because she's concerned for his safety. Veltal tells her she can't come along, reminding her that she has her own job to attend to. Makina argues that she can just call off for the day, but Veltal refuses to let her do that. He points out that if he fails to find a job, he'll have to rely on her income, so it wouldn't be wise for her to skip work. Makina reluctantly agrees to let him go on his own, but to ensure his safety, she hands him a device that includes some emergency funds. It also has a tracker so that if Veltal encounters any trouble, he can contact her, and she'll rush to his aid. While he appreciates her concern, the level of precaution she's taking makes him feel like a child. Despite his insistence on going alone, Veltal quickly realizes that he doesn't know what kinds of jobs are available, or even how to apply for one. To make matters worse, he's getting hungry, meaning he can't afford to be picky about his options if he wants to avoid begging in the streets. Frustrated, he stands up and shouts that he has no money and is looking for a job. As he yells, a man approaches him, advising him to stop. The man tells Veltal that if he wants work, he should go to the commercial guild and apply using his citizen ID. However, Veltal has never heard of a citizen ID, leading the man to assume he must be an immigrant unfamiliar with the city. The man explains that this is his turf and Veltal shouldn't be making a scene here. Realizing he's unknowingly encroached on someone else's territory, Veltal apologizes and prepares to leave. But before he does, the man hands him an application form, advising him to take it to the commercial guild to apply for a job. While it won't guarantee him employment, it's better than doing nothing. The man also warns Veltal to stay away from companies affiliated with IMI, especially in construction, because they are notorious for exploiting workers and disregarding safety regulations. Grateful for the advice, Veltal thanks the man and heads to the commercial guild. Upon arriving at the guild, Veltal meets with an interviewer who isn't particularly keen on hiring him. Veltol's application lists wide-scale annihilation magic, dungeon creation, and experience leading a nation 500 years ago as his special skills, which doesn't exactly match the job market's current demands. The interviewer calmly sets his application aside and informs Veltol that there are no positions available for someone with his qualifications. Moreover, Veltol's lack of a familia disqualifies him from employment altogether. Feeling dejected, Veltol returns home and lays his head on Makina's lap, asking if he's truly incapable of accomplishing anything in this world. Makina reassures him that he is still superior to everyone else and suggests that he let her handle the working from now on. However, Veltol refuses to sit idle and asks if there's anyone she can reach out to for assistance. After some thought, Makina remembers someone who might be able to help. Veltol is surprised that Makina has a friend in this era, but she insists that she wouldn't exactly call this person a friend. They do go shopping together, eat, play, and sometimes even have sleepovers, but that's as far as it goes. Veltol is puzzled, as that sounds exactly like a friend to him, but Makina still refuses to acknowledge it. A little while later, they meet Makina's acquaintance at a nearby cafe, and to Veltol's surprise, it's the hacker girl he met the previous day. She introduces herself properly as Takahashi and admits that although Makina had mentioned the return of the great demon lord, she never actually thought she'd get to meet him in person. She starts poking Veltol to check if he's real, prompting Makina to scold her for being disrespectful. Veltol, however, says it's fine since he's the one asking for her help. He then asks how Takahashi and Makina first met, and Takahashi starts to explain that they connected on a doujin site. But seeing the look on Makina's face, she decides it's best not to mention Makina's search history and tells Veltol to just forget about it. Veltol then notices the familia implanted in Takahashi's neck and reaches out to inspect it, startling her. However, she lets him proceed, and after he's done, he apologizes for the sudden move, but explains that he noticed her familia is different from Makina's, so he was curious about its structure and functionality. Takahashi is astonished that Veltol can glean so much information just by touch, and Makina explains that Veltol has a Sage Eye ability, which allows him to understand the composition of any object by sensing the flow of mana. While Veltol has a general grasp of how a familia works, there are still many components he can't fully analyze, but that's a concern for another day. For now, they're here to see if Takahashi can introduce him to some kind of work. Takahashi asks why Veltol didn't go to the commercial guild, and he explains that he already tried, but they rejected him for not having a familia. Furthermore, due to a certain CEO's grudge against him, Veltol is unable to get a familia installed. Hearing this, Takahashi considers the situation. Veltol is a youthful-looking 5-year-old demon lord with a captivating voice, a handsome face, and no familia. There's really only one clear option. With a grin, she announces that Veltol's new career path is set. He's going to become a streamer. Takahashi explained that streamers upload videos of themselves doing activities online, where they earn money through ad revenue or donations. She even has some old equipment left from her streaming days, though it might be a bit outdated. However, if Veltol becomes popular, he can eventually afford to buy new gear for himself. Makina, on the other hand, is firmly opposed to the idea of Veltol becoming a streamer, as she believes the career is highly unstable and risky. She feels it would be much wiser for him to get a reliable job, like flipping burgers. But Takahashi sees this as a great opportunity, noting that Veltol has a great voice, striking looks, and a captivating aura, making him a prime candidate for becoming a star. With Takahashi framing it this way, even Makina has to admit that Veltol is indeed charming, though she's still not entirely convinced it's the right path for him. There are certain games he wouldn't be able to play without a familia, but he could just focus on games that still use physical controls, which most people don't watch for the gameplay anyway. They watch to see Veltol in action. Makina asks Veltol what he thinks about all this, and considering his limited options, he agrees to give Takahashi's idea a shot. Later that day, while Makina was taking a bath, Veltol researched this world's internet. He quickly grasped how it works, seeing that it allows information to spread faster than anything he's ever encountered. However, this easy access also leads people to either watch cat videos or engage in more questionable activities online. Veltal figures it should be relatively simple for him to sway public opinion in his favor. Just then, Makina finishes her bath and walks out completely naked. Realizing what just happened, she quickly apologizes to Veltal for her inconsideration, explaining that living alone for so long has made her forget such social boundaries. Veltal reassures her, saying there's no need to apologize since he actually found her body quite beautiful, although he still thinks his own physique is superior. A few hours later, Takahashi arrives at Makina's house with her old equipment to help set it up for Veltal. Once everything is ready, she hands him a controller to try out some games. Though she starts explaining the controls, Veltal quickly assures her that he's already familiar with how they work. This kind of analysis is far easier than understanding a familia. He begins browsing the game library and settles on Bloodborne. Takahashi recalls how many people rage quit the game due to its difficulty, but she believes Veltal's analytical skills will make it manageable for him. However, when he starts the game, he struggles to get past the intro. It's far more challenging than he expected, and even after several hours, he still hasn't made significant progress. Takahashi bluntly tells him that he sucks at the game. While Makina finds her comment rude, Veltal acknowledges that it's true. Despite understanding the mechanics, mastering them is another story. Makina starts to worry that streaming may not be a viable path for him after all. Contrary to Makina's concerns, Takahashi thinks Veltal's struggles could actually boost his online image, as the internet loves nothing more than a hot guy who fails with confidence. But before they proceed, Takahashi insists on refining Veltal's introductory greeting. When he asks if he can simply introduce himself in a straightforward manner, she explains that's not an option. With over 5 million streamers worldwide and only a tiny fraction making enough to live on, Veltal needs to make a memorable impression with his greeting. She seems to place a lot of importance on this, so Veltal asks Makina if she has any suggestions. Makina thinks for a moment and suggests he adapt one of his warden declarations, which involves telling the foolish mortals they should feel honored by his presence. It's dramatic, and Takahashi considers it a good starting point, though she believes it still lacks an attention-grabbing element, so they'll need to keep brainstorming. In the meantime, Takahashi gives Veltal a crash course on streaming, explaining that he'll need to go live daily, even if no one is watching. She advises him to steer clear of discussing erotic or racist topics to avoid getting banned quickly. Most importantly, while Veltal is streaming, Makina must make sure she never appears on camera, as they don't want people thinking she's his girlfriend. As a friendly gesture, Takahashi asks a friend to help promote Veltal's stream, calling in a favor. Over time, Veltal's popularity grows steadily. When trolls inevitably begin to invade his stream, he remains unfazed and even encourages them to keep roasting him. To him, it doesn't matter because he gains power from being the center of attention, even if the publicity is negative. Before long, through sheer dedication, Veltal reaches a milestone of 1 million views. For his latest stream, he plans to play Bloodborne 3 non-stop until he completes it. However, during this stream, a camera captures footage of Makina's house, showing the moment she arrives home from work. As Makina steps inside, Veltal is just finishing the game, celebrating his hard-earned victory as his fans congratulate him. He's come a long way, having improved significantly after conquering the first 2 Bloodborne games, though this final installment was still an immense challenge. After thanking both his supporters and detractors for sticking around, Veltal wraps up the stream. With the stream over, he takes a deep breath, and Makina checks in to see if he needs anything. He assures her he's fine and mentions that he's heading out to pick up a package. Makina offers to retrieve it for him, but Veltal has been looking for an excuse to get some fresh air, so he declines. Makina then tells him she'll have dinner ready when he gets back. As Veltal walks through the city's slums, he reflects on the distorted and strained social structures. But suddenly, he's taken aback when he encounters a familiar face hero Graham, sitting on the side of the road. Back in the day, Graham was a kind-hearted brother who cared deeply for his younger sister, Melina, who had fallen ill. To help her recover, he comforted her and set out to gather medicinal herbs. Just as he was about to leave, his father called him over, handing him a sword. As there were reports of monsters in the forest, the sword was meant for Graham to protect himself in case of danger. His mother, worried about his safety, said a small prayer for him before he departed, and Graham thanked both parents for their thoughtfulness. That day, the herb gathering went smoothly, but on his way back, Graham encountered an army of lizardmen led by Zenol, one of Veltal's generals. Fortunately, since he was hidden, he didn't have to fight them. Graham was left wondering why they would be in such a remote area. To his horror, upon returning home, he found his house and family had been reduced to ashes. From that moment on, he swore vengeance on Veltal. Yet, here he is now, sitting beside his sworn enemy, with a dazed expression. Veltal tries to break the silence by talking about a nearby udon shop, assuring Graham that it's one of the best places around. However, Graham remains uninterested in the conversation. Veltal continues, mentioning how the food in this world is far superior to what it was in his time. Graham agrees but doesn't have much to add. When the food arrives, they are about to start eating when Graham finally speaks up, remarking how surreal it is to be slurping noodles next to the very person who killed his family and friends. Veltal admits it feels strange for him, too, since Graham had slain several of his vassals. But right now, Veltal holds no hatred toward Graham. Instead, he's curious about how Graham, a mortal, has managed to survive for so long. The only plausible explanation would be if Graham had somehow achieved immortality, though that would contradict his ideology of making the most out of a finite life. Graham clarifies that he never surrendered his mortality. Instead, after defeating Veltal, the goddess Meldia rewarded him with the blessing of eternal youth. This blessing allowed him to live for such a long time, though it does not grant true immortality. Veltal remarks that Meldia must have been quite fond of Graham to grant him such a blessing, especially after he ended the war with the immortals. However, once peace was restored, mortals quickly resumed waging wars against each other. Graham was then ordered back onto the battlefield to slay the very people he had once fought to protect. Even after the civil war ended, he found himself the target of hatred from the very people he had saved. Veltal believes that outcome was inevitable, as people naturally fear individuals who wield great power. Exiled from the kingdom, Graham was forced to wander the world for centuries, killing mortals and immortals alike after the merging of worlds known as Fantasian. As a result, he feels there's no longer a place for him in this world as a hero. He asks Veltal why he sought to rule the world in the first place. Veltal explains that his goal was to achieve world peace. He points out that there are various ways to become immortal through phoenixes, curses, or blessings, yet most immortals were once mortal. Nevertheless, mortals continuously ostracized and persecuted immortals for being different, while immortals did the same to mortals. Veltal's conclusion was that people will always fear and hate what they do not understand. So the only way to ensure peace was to rise to the top and rule over everyone, preventing such persecution. Graham doesn't believe that peace through world domination would succeed, but he also acknowledges that people left to their own devices will never achieve peace, having witnessed firsthand the senseless wars and persecution. Even so, he refuses to concede that Veltal's approach is the right one. Veltal accepts that Graham will never agree with him. Graham then gets up to leave, thanking Veltal for the meal. Before departing, he admits that he's glad they had the chance to talk. Veltal also stands up to go and, while walking down the street, notices Takahashi in an alley, seemingly in trouble. Apparently, Takahashi had hired an ogre for a job, but now he's trying to extort her for double the pay. She refuses, calling him foolish for thinking she would give in to his demands. The ogre, prepared to get violent if he doesn't get his way, raises a fist to strike her. At that moment, Veltal grabs the ogre's arm, telling him to leave Takahashi alone. Feeling generous, he offers to overlook the ogre's disrespect. However, the ogre recognizes Veltal as the person he beat up some time ago and isn't intimidated, claiming he'll kill Veltal this time. Takahashi tries to warn Veltal to run before he gets hurt, but Veltal assures her it's fine since he's been looking for an opportunity to test the power he has regained from reaching 1 million subscribers. As the ogre swings at him, Veltal stretches out his hand, catching the punch. But then the ogre uses wind magic, shattering Veltal's arm. With his powers partially restored, Veltal regenerates his arm instantly and sends the ogre flying into a pile of trash, knocking him out cold. Disappointed, Veltal remarks that he was hoping for a more challenging fight. Takahashi approaches him, asking if he's alright, and Veltal confirms that he's fine. He then inquires who the ogre was and why he attacked her. Takahashi explains that the ogre was supposed to be her bodyguard for an important job today, but suddenly made absurd demands, apologizing for knocking him out. Veltal says he didn't realize the ogre was her bodyguard. Takahashi dismisses it, saying it's no big deal since she just found someone better. She then asks Veltal to be her bodyguard for the day, even offering to pay him for it. Since he owes her a favor, Veltal agrees. Takahashi leads him to the location and reveals that she intends to steal something from a warehouse, needing him to create a distraction while she retrieves it. Veltal says he understands the objective, but before Takahashi can give further instructions, he's already moved ahead and kicked down the door to what turns out to be a major Yakuza operation. Veltal isn't quite sure what his mission is here, so he asks Takahashi through the comms whether the cube on the table is the target. Takahashi confirms it, but seems puzzled as to how he's even able to communicate with her, given that he doesn't have a familia. Veltal proudly explains that he simply mimicked the ether communication magic produced by the familia, making it work the same way. Since there aren't many enemies around, Veltal declares he'll subdue them and claim the cube for Takahashi. However, she reminds him not to kill anyone. Veltal agrees to hold back, and before the action starts, he introduces himself with his signature stream greeting. Unfortunately, none of the Yakuza members recognize him, creating an awkward atmosphere. If there are still people who don't know him, Veltal realizes he'll have to work much harder to become famous. But for now, his power backed by 1 million subscribers should be enough to deal with these guys. The Yakuza are baffled by what's happening but assume Veltal is just some crazy person. One of them draws a magic gun and fires at him. Unfazed, Veltal uses strengthening magic to deflect the bullets. Once the Yakuza member's gun runs out of ammo, Veltal goes on the offensive, effortlessly taking out the Yakuza one by one. The member with the magic gun switches to a regular firearm, as it's quicker than reloading. But before he can shoot, Takahashi manipulates his vision, creating an illusion that makes him accidentally fire at his own partner. Veltal then knocks out the last opponent, and with all of them unconscious, the mission seems almost complete. Veltal examines one of the Yakuza members' guns, which uses a special card as ammunition. Takahashi is impressed by how easily Veltal handled the situation, but she warns that they should grab the box and leave before more trouble arises. She says she's on her way to meet him, but Veltal advises her to stay put because it appears that a new threat has arrived. This enemy, hidden under an invisibility cloak, begins attacking Veltal. To even the odds, Veltal uses the magic gun to blast away the cloak, revealing a giant mecha suit. Takahashi recognizes it as 4th generation Magino gear, far too expensive for the Yakuza to own. This is Veltal's first time encountering something like this, and he's eager to test his strength. Veltal fires the magic gun at the mecha, but the attack is ineffective. The enemy follows suit, drawing a much more powerful magic gun. As he attempts to shoot, Veltal swiftly moves into a blind spot above the mech. By the time the enemy locates him again, Veltal has already positioned himself and fires a powerful blast. Though strong, his attack isn't enough to defeat the mech. Knowing he can't win with blasts alone, Veltal switches to close combat and summons a sword. The mech mirrors him, converting its gun into a sword, and the two clash in an impressive spectacle. Veltal is thoroughly enjoying the battle, but the mecha soon gets serious. Before Veltal realizes it, his arm is severed, and he's decapitated. The pilot reports that his target has been eliminated, only to panic when Veltal's severed head starts talking. Veltal praises the pilot for his skill in decapitating a demon lord, but criticizes him for not double tapping to ensure the kill. Veltal decides to reward the pilot for the excellent fight by showing him the strongest weapon in his arsenal, the great sword Vernal, as a terrifying aura emanates from the weapon. The mech pilot is paralyzed with fear, unable to defend himself as Veltal methodically severs the mech's limbs. leaving the pilot barely alive. Veltal deliberately avoids striking any vital areas, intending to interrogate the pilot. However, the pilot sends a final report to HQ, announcing his failure and initiating Code 8090. If you're curious, Code 8090 activates a gun within the helmet to prevent interrogation. Once that's over, Takahashi emerges from her hiding spot, relieved to see Veltal unharmed, but still shaken by the sight of his decapitation. Veltal, on the other hand, finds the situation more surprising for the existence of weaponry that can empower individuals to this extent. He remarks on the terrifying nature of this era, but Takahashi believes Veltal is the truly frightening one. Having just dismantled a Magino gear, a weapon capable of destroying entire nations. This particular Magino gear, she notes, was manufactured by Marcus's company, and there's no way the Yakuza could have obtained one on their own. The mission is proving to be far more dangerous than she anticipated. Still, Veltal is curious about why there was so much effort put into securing the cube. Takahashi explains that the cube is a storage device containing valuable information her client seeks. She offers to let Veltal examine the data, pulling out a cube reader and placing the cube onto it. Initially, the only thing that appears on the screen is a blank page, but after Takahashi makes some adjustments, the cube activates, revealing a list of names. Takahashi is puzzled, unable to decipher the meaning behind this list, but Veltal immediately recognizes the names as those of his immortal subjects. This revelation alarms him, and Takahashi suggests contacting her client to understand more about it. Unfortunately, the client isn't picking up the phone, so they'll have to meet him in person to get more details. Takahashi leads Veltal to the enormous apartment building where her client resides, informing him that the person they're looking for is on the 13th floor. At the front door, Takahashi uses her hacking skills to bypass the security system, proudly declaring that there's no system she can't crack. As they step into the elevator, Takahashi prepares to press the button, but Veltal stops her, wanting to do it himself. She doesn't mind, but she asks why he wants to. Veltal admits there's no real reason. He simply enjoys pushing buttons. As he begins pressing the button for the 13th floor, Takahashi remembers to mention that the elevator doesn't go there directly. Instead, it follows a strange sequence. 2nd floor, 17th, back to the 4th, and so on, until it finally reaches the 13th. Once they arrive, Veltal starts stepping out of the elevator, but Takahashi warns him to be careful. Her client, Eliu, is notoriously paranoid and has filled the area with traps that could turn him into minced meat. Veltal thanks her for the warning, but he's confident there are no active traps here, though it's more accurate to say all the traps have already been disarmed. Takahashi is astonished at how easily Veltal figured this out. However, Veltal, being a demon lord, is used to creating and managing dungeons, so detecting traps is second nature to him. They continue onward until they reach Eliu's front door. Takahashi rings the bell, but there's no answer. She finds it odd, as Eliu never ignores someone at the door, even if he's avoiding phone calls. Veltal then notices something more alarming. The door isn't locked, which is highly unusual for someone as cautious as Eliu. Sensing danger, Veltal advises they proceed carefully. Takahashi leads the way to Eliu's workroom, where they find him slumped over in his chair. As they approach, it becomes clear he's drenched in blood and completely lifeless. Takahashi initially panics, but Veltal calms her and inspects the body. He vaguely recalls Eliu's face, albeit covered with trash, which makes sense since Eliu often disguised himself as a vagrant to gather intel. Veltal observes a stab wound in Eliu's chest and another in his neck, deducing from the state of the blood that the murder happened a few days ago. While Eliu had many enemies, the efficient nature of the kill suggests it wasn't driven by anger, but rather executed by a professional hitman. The fact that Eliu's familia was destroyed adds to the suspicion that someone is covering up information related to the mission Takahashi was working on. Since Eliu is now dead, there's little they can learn from him. Takahashi thinks for a moment and begins searching the room, reasoning that an experienced information broker and etha hacker like Eliu would have some kind of offline storage hidden nearby. Her instincts are right. She uncovers a laptop stashed in a concealed drawer. When she boots it up, the files appear corrupted, but Veltol notices they're arranged in a specific pattern. Using this clue, Takahashi compiles the data and discovers a video message Eliu left behind in case of his untimely death. In the video, Eliu explains he wasn't sure who would find this, but someone needed to know the truth. The city's prosperity, he reveals, is built on a horrifying evil. The central ether reactor that powers the city supposedly needs energy from 10 monolay lines, but only 2 exist in this area. The reactor's continuous energy supply comes from an alternate source, the Immortal Furnace Project. The Immortal Furnace burns the souls of immortals, using them as ether fuel. Because immortal souls generate much more energy than thousands of mortal ones, they are a coveted power source. Eliu's findings revealed that Marcus's company employed desperate homeless people for the furnace's construction, only to have them mysteriously disappear, likely killed to feed the furnace. Among the first immortals sacrificed was Zenol, one of Veltol's closest subordinates, which infuriates Veltol. Marcus had orchestrated a scheme to turn public sentiment against immortals, making their execution and soul burning socially acceptable. While the public was unaware of the real reason behind these killings, Marcus recently negotiated with the Yakuza for information on new immortals, suggesting he's running out of victims. The revelation enrages Takahashi, but she realizes there's little she can do. If she tries to expose the truth, she could meet the same fate as Eliu. Veltol reassures her that this is a matter for the immortals to handle. As their king, he takes responsibility, so she need not bear this burden. Before leaving, they report Eliu's death to city officials to ensure he receives a proper burial. As they depart, Veltol attempts to contact Makina to warn her about the Immortal Furnace, only to find she's unresponsive, hinting that something terrible may have happened to her. While Veltol was off handling his task, Makina checked the fridge to figure out what she could prepare for dinner before his return. Sadly, the contents hadn't changed since the last time she looked. On the upside, Alex suggests that she might still manage to make a decent curry with what she has. Right then, the doorbell rings, so she stands up to go answer it, only to feel a wave of disappointment and disgust when it turns out to be Marcus. After what Marcus has done, the only appropriate response is violence on sight, so Makina hits him with a massive burst of fire. Marcus is engulfed in flames and sent flying backward, but he's just as immortal as she is, so a little fire isn't going to be enough to end him. Makina completely transforms and steps out of the house to face him because she already knows he's up to no good. Just before the fight starts, Makina disconnects her familia from the network to prevent Marcus from accessing it. Following that, they both start hurling magical weapon attacks at each other. The battle appears pretty evenly matched at first, but while Marcus is momentarily distracted, Makina closes in and grabs one of his arms, which promptly explodes and detaches. She successfully catches Marcus off guard with this move, but within seconds, he's already regenerated his arm. He then casts a bloody sword rain area attack and causes a massive explosion of his own, but thanks to the shield Makina put up, she was completely unharmed. However, she can't say the same for the house, as she doesn't have fire insurance. Just then, Marcus' secretary leaps out of the smoke and tries to finish Makina off with a sneak attack. But Makina is too quick for her, so the only thing the secretary slashes is an illusion. Makina had expected Marcus to be too cowardly to come alone, so she prepares a spell to burn the secretary to ash. However, just before she can finish, Marcus calls out Codebreaker, and suddenly, Makina's familia shuts down. This leaves her momentarily disoriented, giving the secretary an opportunity to strike. He seizes the chance and stabs Makina through the chest. Distracted and weakened, Makina collapses to the ground, showing no signs of getting back up anytime soon. Now that the fight is over, the secretary scolds Marcus for acting so recklessly since Makina could have easily killed her back there. And all this fighting could have been avoided if Marcus had simply disabled Makina's familia from the start. As the two stand over Makina's motionless body, Makina glares at Marcus. But Marcus is actually enjoying it because he loves seeing Makina in such a pitiful state. Makina demands to know what he did to her, and Marcus explains that he merely shut down her familia. Makina hadn't thought he'd be able to do that, especially since she disconnected her familia from the internet before the fight began. Under normal circumstances, she'd be right. But Marcus Familia is somewhat unique. It's a new prototype specifically engineered to be more advanced than standard Familias. All modern Familias come with a built-in backdoor for system access. And as the director of ITMI, he has admin privileges over every Familia in the city. This means he can forcibly shut down any Familia whenever he wishes. That means that no one can defeat him since he can shut down all Familia users and outclass all non-Familia users in casting speed. If no one is capable of defeating him, then that means he is the strongest in the world. That may be true, but Makina doesn't understand why Marcus is so obsessed with being the strongest, as he has nothing to gain from it. But Marcus has his reasons. He wants to become the new demon lord, and he doesn't intend to achieve that status through brute force like Veltal did. In this age, possessing information and technology is all it takes to control the world. But for someone like Marcus, ruling from the shadows would be far too dull. So his goal is to dominate the world on a scale far greater than Veltal ever achieved in his prime. At that moment, the secretary reminds Marcus that there's no time allocated for a monologue and that they're running late for his next appointment. With that, Marcus decides to finish things quickly, signaling that it's now time for Makina to become fuel for the immortal furnace. By the time Veltal and Takahashi return home, they find the entire place destroyed with no traces of Makina whatsoever. The only thing left is a scorched game controller, and Veltal is absolutely devastated because Makina was the person he cared for the most in this world. He's completely zoned out in grief, so Takahashi asks him if he's alright. Veltal snaps back to reality, realizing they aren't going to solve anything by standing around. So he asks if there's any information about what happened here. Based on social media reports, people are speculating that an explosion might have occurred, though the details are quite unclear, making it difficult to determine what's actually true. Veltal wishes he had some way of at least finding out where Makina is at the moment. Since direct contact with her is impossible, Takahashi searches for another method to locate Makina, which involves deploying the drones. Since this place is a slum, there aren't a lot of security drones passing through, but there are a lot of delivery drones, and those drones have cameras on them. So, all she needs to do is hack into their systems and take a look at the video data within. After a few moments, Takahashi gains access to the drone systems, and from the video feed, they can see the battle that took place here and that Marcus was behind it. They can't make out what Marcus was saying, but after defeating Makina, he and his secretary took her to a restricted area within the city reactor, indicating his plan to use Makina's soul as fuel for the city. Veltal thanks Takahashi for this crucial information and begins heading toward the reactor, but Takahashi urges him to pause and think it over. She understands his desire to rush in and rescue Makina before it's too late, but that reactor is the most heavily secured place in the entire city. It has dozens of Magino gears patrolling the area, so Veltal won't be able to handle it on his own. And while Takahashi can certainly help him get there, she isn't much of a fighter, so he would need to find someone strong enough to help him. Veltal doesn't have many remaining allies in this era, although there is one person he can think of who might be perfect for this rescue operation. Veltal later goes to meet Graham, who initially wants nothing to do with him. However, when he sees the once proud Veltal kneel and request his help, Graham decides to at least listen. Veltal shares all he has discovered about the city's ether reactor, and Graham, who had always sensed something was amiss, is now utterly horrified by the vile nature of the project. Veltal implores Graham to help him storm the reactor, knowing he can't save Makina on his own in his current state. But Graham appears more irritated than sympathetic. Veltal's subordinates killed Graham's family. Veltal himself waged dozens of wars and killed millions. Now, Veltal is bowing his head to his sworn enemy just to save the life of one immortal woman. Graham finds this utterly shameless. He does not like that the city is built upon the deaths of innocent people, but at the same time, that reactor is the heart of the city. If he were to agree to help Veltal destroy it, the entire city would be plunged into darkness and the lives of millions would be ruined. He asks if Veltal is planning to destroy everyone's lives just to save one person. Veltal chuckles at the notion of such a narrow-minded plan. He's no fool, so he's naturally considered the consequences of his actions, which is why he aims to both save Makina and address the city's problems. However, he lacks the necessary power and allies at the moment, leaving him with no choice but to humbly seek help from his former enemy. The conviction in Veltal's words persuades Graham to step up as a hero once again. Yet, Graham makes it abundantly clear that he's not doing this for Veltal, and hasn't forgotten the terrible deeds Veltal committed centuries ago. Still, with a kidnapped woman's soul on the verge of being sacrificed, Graham agrees to temporarily join forces in the name of justice, even if it feels odd to ally with the Demon Lord. A little while later, Takahashi manages to find a way for them to get into the reactor, without having to go through the restricted area. She leads them to a hidden entrance, apparently used to transport materials for building the reactor. While this path will eventually lead them to the reactor, Veltal remarks that they don't have enough time to clear a maze like this. However, Graham thinks it will be child's play since he's done it many times in the past. He casts a spell called auto-mapping, and within seconds, a detailed map of the maze appears in his hand. Veltal has never encountered a spell like this before, prompting Graham to explain that it's a unique spell he devised during his adventuring days. This irritates Veltal, as he had painstakingly crafted those dungeons back in the day, only to discover that Graham was simply bypassing them. He accuses Graham of lacking pride as an adventurer, but Graham fires back, saying an adventurer's pride has nothing to do with it. His goal was always to clear dungeons as fast as possible, so he couldn't care less if Veltal's traps were wasted. Takahashi, growing frustrated with their bickering, yells at them to quiet down and take the mission seriously since they still need to rescue Makina. The two realize they're being childish, apologize to Takahashi, and promise to focus on the task at hand. Moments later, Graham finishes creating the map, allowing them to navigate the maze without getting lost. Veltal asks if Graham is sure the map is trustworthy, and Graham confirms, adding that his mapping magic can also detect traps and enemies. Fortunately, this maze lacks any security measures, so it should be safe for them to take the shortest path to the reactor. As they make their way toward the reactor, Veltal calls Takahashi to apologize once more for his earlier outburst. Though still somewhat annoyed, she agrees to let it slide as long as he remains focused. Veltal checks in on her side of the plan, and she reports steady progress, though she's uncertain if she'll be finished by the time they reach the reactor room. If she needs more time, Veltal and Graham will have to keep the enemies occupied. As they descend, the ambient ether grows denser, and communication with Takahashi gets choppy. Before the signal cuts out, she tells Veltal she'll finish making the preparations. Veltal takes a deep breath to prepare himself for what lies ahead. Graham then comments that Veltal has grown stronger than he was in the past. Veltal doesn't understand, insisting he's nowhere near the strength he once had. But Graham clarifies that he's talking about a different kind of strength. Veltal was able to lower his head to his sworn enemy to save his subordinate, whereas the old Veltal would have let Makina burn before bowing to anyone. This shows that Veltal's strength of character has grown tremendously, and had he been like this when they clashed all those years ago, things might have turned out differently. When the lift reaches their destination, Veltal and Graham are met by Marcus' secretary, who has been anticipating their arrival, as Marcus expected that Veltal would eventually come. Marcus has Makina restrained and positioned near the reactor's core, clearly reveling in the moment as he prepares to end the life of a former ally. After Veltal's revival, Marcus took it upon himself to investigate the people connected to him and carried out some research. It was during this process that he uncovered Makina's continued existence. Over the years, with the immortal hunts he masterminded, Marcus had been responsible for the deaths of countless immortals. The idea that Makina had managed to survive and remain hidden within the city all this time was something he never anticipated. He explains to her that this place is known as the Immortal Furnace, and as the name suggests, it basically burns the souls of immortals as fuel to generate ether, which in turn fuels the city. At first, Makina is a bit confused by Marcus's monologue, But then she remembers that 2 of her subordinates are still missing. She pieces together that Marcus must have kidnapped and fed them to the immortal furnace. Marcus recalls those 2 and tells Makina all about how concerned the 2 of them looked for one another as their souls were burnt up. This enrages her to such an extent that she unleashes a large torrent of flames. But Marcus simply puts up a shield and remains unharmed. Marcus continues to mock Makina, bringing up her fellow dark peer, Zenol, and revealing that he was the very first immortal to be sacrificed to the furnace. Marcus admits he took so much pleasure in hearing Zenol's screams of torment that he recorded them and turned them into a mixtape. When Makina questions if he plans to use her as fuel next, the answer is practically self-evident. The last immortal they fed to the furnace is nearly depleted, and Marcus cannot risk the reactor losing power, as it's the foundation of the entire city. Typically, he would have sent people to track down more immortals, but if his actions were to come to light, it would trigger a wave of irritating complaints about immortal rights, and that's a hassle he has no desire to face. This is why he went to retrieve Makina personally. Since she's one of the dark peers, her soul should be strong enough to burn for a couple of years, so Marcus won't have to worry about refueling for a while. But he's probably going to have to start looking into alternative power sources at some point. While Marcus is still monologuing, his secretary is facing off against Veltal and Graham. She tells Veltal that she was assigned to stand guard and delay him long enough for Marcus to get through his evil monologue and feed Makina to the furnace. She didn't think Veltal would have the guts to show up, though, and not only did he come, but he brought a friend along, and that friend happens to be none other than the hero Graham. Graham is taken aback to find that there are still people in this era who recognize him, though the secretary quickly clarifies that she only knows of him from the files stored in their database. She remarks on how intriguing it is to see the Demon Lord and the hero working together, but she remains resolute in her duty and declares that she won't let them proceed without a fight. Graham instructs Veltal to move on ahead while he stays behind to deal with the secretary. However, Veltal cautions him to be careful, pointing out that the secretary's abilities are comparable to those of Zenol, the karmic sword. While that may seem impressive, Graham remembers decisively defeating Zenol in swordsmanship during the Immortal War. If her skills are anything like Zenol's, he sees no reason to doubt his ability to handle her. The secretary takes offense to this statement, so she decides to show Graham what she can do and dashes behind him to launch a surprise attack. Graham is caught off guard by her incredible speed, but before her sword strikes him, he manages to guard himself and prevent any injuries. While he does this, Veltal starts sprinting away so he can rescue Makina. As much as the secretary wants to stop him, she's not going to be able to slip past Graham without a fight. Before Veltal leaves, he tells Graham to make sure he doesn't die, and then he jumps down the center line of the reactor to make it to the core as fast as possible. The secretary is determined to stop Veltal, so she resolves to take Graham out as quickly as possible in order to rejoin Marcus. To achieve this, she activates her zero-base gear. A blinding flash of light erupts, and before Graham can fully grasp what's happening, he is struck and sent crashing into a wall. When he looks back at the secretary, she is now clad in a complete set of Magino gear. But this isn't just any ordinary Magino gear. It's a cutting-edge, next-generation prototype that hasn't been officially released yet. It boasts superior efficiency, enhanced speed, and, perhaps most notably, a design that accentuates the secretary's curves, ensuring nothing goes unnoticed. However, there is still one flaw with the design. The operational time of this suit is entirely dependent on the user's magical reserves, but the secretary isn't going to let this fight last long enough for her magic to run out. She dashes forward, and now she's even faster than she was before. As she lands in the wall behind Graham, he barely has enough time to raise his sword and block before he gets knocked through the floor. The secretary informs Graham that he should feel privileged to face such an advanced marvel of modern engineering, but he has no patience for what sounds like another marketing pitch. She mocks him, calling him a relic of the past, pointing out that his sword, armor, and even his familia are all outdated. Confident in her cutting-edge techniques and equipment, She is certain of her impending victory. Graham, however, calmly counters that fancy gear and specialized training mean nothing in the end because in a fight, you either win or lose. The secretary acknowledges his point, but can't resist adding that her fancy equipment is, indeed, very fancy. She slashes at Graham with such speed that he is barely able to react and block before he is hit. But then he sees her sheath her sword again. The second she does, she unleashes yet another lightning speed slash. However, this time Graham was prepared for it, and he is able to block it much more comfortably. Even so, he still can't find any openings in her defenses, so he admits that the level of advancement this era has achieved is truly frightening. The secretary tries dashing behind him to attack once more, but Graham has seen that already, so he parries her attacks and kicks her away, but he can tell that he didn't do much damage due to the toughness of her armor. Graham hasn't made much headway against the secretary in this battle, but he has managed to identify a key aspect of her attack pattern. He points out that her lightning-fast strikes are only possible when her sword is fully sheathed. The secretary acknowledges his observation as accurate, but quickly reminds him that figuring that out doesn't mean he can defeat her. With her advanced Magino gear and unparalleled attack speed, she's confident her victory is all but assured. Growing impatient with the standoff, she decides to end things quickly. She unleashes a flurry of lightning blade attacks, but Graham, having adapted to her speed, now evades her strikes with ease. Even when she lands a hit, it barely affects him, and he recovers almost instantly, landing gracefully on his feet each time. The secretary charges at him again, but this time, while their blades are locked, she tries to hack into Graham's familia to shut his body down, but for some reason, she can't gain access. So she assumes Graham must have implemented some safeguards against hacking. If she can't hack into his familia, this is going to be a lot harder than she anticipated. But she is still confident that she can win nonetheless. However, while she's in the middle of saying this, Graham decides to go on the offensive. He steps on her sword to hold her in place and casts an earth glaive that sends shards of rock flying at her. The secretary quickly frees herself without much difficulty. But Graham isn't done yet. In an instant, he casts an ice spell, freezing both the rocks around her and the secretary herself. While he knows this won't restrain her for long, it's all the time he needs to close the gap and multi-layer cast a fireball at point-blank range. The resulting explosion is so intense that it hurls the secretary backward, slamming her into the wall. Despite the impressive display, she emerges mostly unscathed and absolutely furious that someone she considers a relic of the past, like Graham, is proving to be such a formidable challenge. Graham is amazed that a fireball of that magnitude didn't do more damage, but at least he knows his tactics are still effective against her. The secretary is enraged and sprints forward in a frenzied attack, but all of her strikes are parried, and Graham connects cleanly with a slash to the chest. Although it still doesn't get through the armor, she gets pushed back, and she doesn't understand how she could possibly be losing to a fossil like Graham. But even if Graham is old, he is still the hero who single-handedly ended the immortal war, so there's no way something like this would be able to beat him. She decides to try to make one last move. Channeling all her mana into a single, full-power lightning strike, she's convinced that there's no way she could lose a head-on clash against the rusty old sword Graham is wielding. But Graham calmly corrects her, explaining that his sword isn't rusty. While it may currently be dormant, its light will always return as long as there is someone in need of a hero. Summoning the power of the Ixisword sword for the first time in centuries, Graham calls upon its strength. After a brief moment of evaluating his noble intentions, the sword grants him permission to wield its power. He squares up against the secretary and tells her he is about to use his ultimate technique, the very same one that killed Veltal all those years ago. The secretary still tries her best to defeat Graham, but when she sees the size of his sword light growing, she realizes she isn't getting paid enough to deal with all this, but it's too late by then, so Graham unleashes his attack. It is still insanely powerful, so even though the sword only allowed him to use a fraction of the power that he possessed in his prime, with a single, well-placed strike, Graham utterly destroyed the secretary's Magino gear. It's honestly remarkable that she even managed to survive being hit by it. Now, the secretary finally understands that she can't defeat Graham, though she still struggles to comprehend why she lost to him. Seeing her confusion, Graham sits down beside her and explains that her defeat came down to a difference in experience, particularly his, which spans over 500 years of experience. The secretary asks why Graham is getting up to go help Veltal fight Marcus, but Graham thinks Veltal will be just fine on his own. She tells Graham that Veltal stands no chance against Marcus since Marcus is much stronger than her, and on top of that, no one without a familia will be capable of defeating or keeping up with Marcus in the first place. Graham tells her she is severely underestimating Veltal, although he understands why she would think Veltal is weaker than Marcus since she has never seen Veltal's trump card. The only person who knows about it is Graham since he had to fight Veltal to the death. But Veltal rarely ever used it, so even Marcus probably isn't aware of Veltal's legendary sword. Graham's primary goal was simply to ensure that individuals like the secretary couldn't interfere with Veltal's fight, as he was confident Veltal would emerge victorious. With that settled, the secretary asks if Graham intends to kill her, but he assures her he doesn't. As a hero, he has no reason to finish off someone who is too injured to continue fighting. However, before the conversation can go further, magic bullets suddenly begin raining down on them. Reacting swiftly, Graham casts a protective shield with his magic, keeping both of them safe from the unexpected attack. It looks like reinforcements have arrived, but they were more than willing to shoot the secretary along with Graham. So something tells him that she is in as much danger as he is. And if that's the case, what kind of hero would he be if he didn't protect an injured woman to the best of his abilities? Meanwhile, down at the core, Marcus has Makina by the throat and is nearly finished with his monologue. Without hesitation, he hurls her into the furnace to ensure her soul is completely consumed, as Makina plunges toward her inevitable demise. Her only thought is the heartbreaking realization that she will no longer be able to stand beside Veltal. But just before she reaches the furnace, a swirling cloud of black smoke rushes in, catching her mid-fall. The smoke swiftly carries her back to the platform, and when Makina opens her eyes, she sees Veltal standing over her, declaring that he has come to save her. He turns to face Marcus, who is visibly irritated by Veltal's presence. Deciding to play along as Syl for a bit, Marcus casually mentions that he's been watching Veltal's streams recently and congratulates him on reaching 1 million subscribers. Veltal, uninterested in small talk, cuts to the point. Wanting to be fair, he asks Marcus if he has any valid justification for attacking Makina and burning the souls of so many immortals. Marcus, with pride in his voice, declares that he owes Veltal no explanations. Veltal has one final question. He wants to know if Marcus would ever consider swearing loyalty to him again. Without hesitation, Marcus defiantly responds that he will never serve under Veltal as long as he lives. Veltal has heard all he needs to hear, so he summons his demonic sword and declares that he will end Marcus's immortal life today. Marcus isn't fazed by Veltal's threat in the slightest. He begins casting blood spears at Veltal, and even though Veltal is able to deflect them, Marcus makes the spears explode to catch him off guard and pulls out a blood sword so he can fight in close range. Veltal makes it out of the explosion unharmed, so he charges at Marcus. Marcus notices that Veltal already has strengthening magic cast on himself. He admits that it was a smart move since Marcus can't cancel out magic that has already been activated. But despite Veltal's strengthening magic, Marcus is still able to keep up with and even overpower him in physical combat. Veltal is knocked to the ground, and Marcus takes immense satisfaction in seeing him on his hands and knees. Despite this, Veltal refuses to back down, determined to punish Marcus for his unforgivable crimes against immortal kind. Marcus, unimpressed, mocks him and asks if he truly believes he has what it takes to carry out that threat. But Veltal has no doubts. He knows he has the strength to defeat Marcus because he is the one true demon lord. Marcus bursts into laughter, dashing around the room and taunting Veltal that his days as the demon lord are long over. However, Veltal doesn't fall for the provocation and catches Marcus as he attempts to sneak up from behind. With precision, Veltal raises his sword and aims directly at Marcus' neck to destroy his familia. but Marcus, anticipating the move, reacts at the last second, pushing Veltal's sword upwards so the strike only manages to take out his head. After Marcus regenerates his head, he tells Veltal that he fully expected him to target his familia at some point in their fight. But no matter what Veltal tries, he is never going to be able to outpace him. Just like on the day Veltal got resurrected, the fact that he doesn't have a familia puts him at a significant disadvantage. To make that clear, Marcus decides to display the power of his familia spell casting. Before Veltal can even react, Marcus casts a bloody bomb spell in his hand, continuing to do so over and over again until Veltal's arms and legs have been atomized. Marcus then finishes it off with a massive explosion to the chest. Even though Veltal is practically medium rare at this point and Marcus is on top, Marcus doesn't feel satisfied at all. He thought he would enjoy humiliating Veltal to this extent, but now that he has attained victory, all he feels is emptiness. Marcus begins to slowly approach Makina, intent on throwing her into the furnace as planned. But suddenly, an overwhelming pressure emanates from behind him, stopping him in his tracks. Veltal has risen to his feet, radiating more power than ever before. He acknowledges Marcus' skill in pushing him to this point and concedes that, in his current form, he truly cannot defeat Marcus. Veltal even commends Marcus for all the strength he has gained through his own hard work in this era, expressing a measure of respect for him. However, Veltal firmly declares that this doesn't mean he will lose. Though he suffered defeat once before, he is still the ultimate final boss. Until now, only Graham had ever managed to push him this far. Before Veltal goes all out, he asks Marcus one last time if he is willing to give up his evil ways and return to serve under him. Marcus is visibly shaken and asks why Veltal would be bothered with a question like that at this point. Veltal explains that, depending on Marcus' answer, he might be willing to overlook all the chaos Marcus has caused. Marcus becomes erratic and starts yelling that Veltal's time as the Demon Lord is over. He declares that he's going to get rid of Veltal and every other immortal so that he will be the only immortal Demon Lord. Veltal accepts that as a no. Marcus attempts to cast a blood sword to attack Veltal before he can do anything, but his spell gets cancelled before he can finish. Marcus is stunned, unable to comprehend what just happened, and a sense of panic begins to creep in as Veltal bursts into maniacal laughter. Veltal proudly announces that he will grant Marcus the privilege of witnessing his magnificent second form, and his transformation begins. Meanwhile, outside the reactor base, Takahashi is executing her part of Veltal's plan. Though it's not entirely legal, she uses her hacking expertise to commandeer every screen in the city, broadcasting one of Veltal's pre-recorded streams for everyone to watch. At first, the sudden ad confuses the public, but as the stream continues, Veltal's striking appearance and charismatic performance quickly captivate the viewers, turning their confusion into fascination. With that, Takahashi's job is done. She reflects on what Veltal told her during the ride. He didn't give her specific orders, but said he needed her to raise people's faith in him. She had no idea what he was talking about, so she asked for clarification on how exactly his faith boost works. Veltal didn't feel like explaining the intricacies of his faith system, so he simply told her to raise his popularity, and that should do the trick. Initially, Takahashi didn't think it was possible since popularity can't be raised in a single day. But as an elite hacker in a technology-driven era, she knew she could do as much illegal stuff as necessary to make it happen. The best part, since she did it anonymously, the police would never catch her. Veltal's faith reserves should now be at their peak, giving him the power he needs to rescue Makina from the reactor core. Marcus begins to question his decisions as he lays eyes on Veltal's second form. He had no idea Veltal was capable of transforming like this, but Veltal mocks him for his ignorance, calling him foolish for believing he had grasped the full extent of the Demon Lord's power. Veltal explains that manifesting this form requires an immense amount of faith combined with direct access to high-density ether ley lines. With a grand flourish, he invites Marcus to tremble in awe before his greatness. Still, Marcus clings to a sliver of hope, reasoning that if Veltal lost to Graham back then, there's a chance he could still be defeated. Veltal can't deny that he was defeated by Graham, But if Marcus thinks he is capable of replicating such an incredible feat, he is more than welcome to try. Marcus nervously tries to cast his blood sword spell, but it's still not working. And no matter how many times he casts it, it keeps getting cancelled just before it is activated. Marcus doesn't understand why this is happening, but Veltol tells him there's nothing to be confused about. He is only replicating the same trick Marcus pulled the first time they fought. Back then, Marcus Familia let him stay 2 steps ahead of Veltol in terms of magic casting. But now, with Veltol's new form and boosted capabilities, he has achieved Proclaim magic. Marcus is stunned that Veltol managed to pull off such a feat in such a short time, especially considering that even the most advanced magi tech has yet to replicate magic without incantations or proclamations. For Veltol, however, it was a straightforward process after taking on this form and thoroughly analyzing Marcus Familia. While Proclaim magic consumes a significant amount of ether, Veltol has the advantage of being next to a massive power source, allowing him to cast spells as much as he pleases simply by willing them into existence. He credits Marcus for making this possible, admitting that even with his genius, he couldn't have achieved this without using Marcus' work as a foundation. With a mocking tone, Veltol commends Marcus once more for his exceptional contributions, but now declares it's time for him to face his punishment. Marcus still refuses to accept that he has lost, so he tries to cast his blood swords again. This time, instead of just canceling Marcus' magic, Veltol decides to disable Marcus Familia altogether, so he can't spam his magic anymore. That doesn't stop Marcus from trying, though, but he looks so pitiful and desperate that it's kind of awkward. Eventually, it sinks in that he has been completely dominated, so he starts questioning how this could have possibly happened to him after all the careful planning he did to surpass Veltol. Veltol grows tired of Marcus' constant whining and summons an explosion inside Marcus' mouth to silence him, ordering him to remain quiet. However, Marcus regenerates his mouth and is about to start shouting again. Unfazed, Veltol uses wind magic to slice him apart and fire magic to reduce him to ash. Despite this, Marcus regenerates once more, so Veltol relentlessly bombards him with a barrage of magic until Marcus finally collapses to the ground. Utterly drained, simply killing Marcus wouldn't suffice as punishment for the atrocities he's committed. So Veltol decides to take inspiration from Takahashi. Using his magic, he hacks into Marcus Familia, forcing him to experience horrifying visions as part of his retribution. Marcus starts freaking out, so Veltol explains that none of those things are actually real. He's simply using Marcus Familia to feed his brain false visual information. This kind of illusion is so realistic that one would never be able to tell the difference. Normally, Marcus can't believe Veltol was able to hack into his state-of-the-art Familia so easily. But after everything else Veltol has done, it's not actually that surprising. Marcus has basically lost all his advantages now. Between the threat of being killed over and over again at Veltol's hands or being left to go insane while haunted by illusions, Marcus begins cowering in fear and pleading for his life. He even swears that he will loyally serve Veltol once more. Veltol had already given Marcus 2 chances to surrender, making it clear that there would be no mercy beyond that point. Now, it's time to deliver his punishment. He raises his sword and drives it through Marcus' back while he's bowing, then lifts his body high into the air. When Marcus opens his eyes, he realizes with growing horror that he's being held over the immortal furnace, and the reality of his grim fate begins to sink in. Desperately, Marcus asks Veltol if he truly intends to drop him into the furnace. Veltol doesn't hesitate in his reply. This is exactly what he plans to do. Marcus tries to reason with him, arguing that Veltol has nothing to gain by throwing him into the furnace. But Veltol has very good reasons. 1. Marcus' face is annoying. 2. If Marcus is dropped in the furnace, then it will continue to operate a little while longer, at least long enough for an alternative energy source to be invented. Marcus starts yelling that Veltol is no better than him since he is willing to use the machine he came here to save Makina from. While going through with this definitely is morally gray. Veltol isn't called a demon lord because he's a morally upstanding guy. Marcus argues that, aside from his selfish ambitions, there were circumstances that forced him to do things this way, so it's not entirely his fault. But Veltol isn't going to be talked down. In a desperate final attempt, Marcus uses some of his blood to launch an attack. Why he thought that would work is anyone's guess. Veltal, completely done with Marcus' antics, casually scrapes his body off his sword with his fingers and lets him fall into the immortal furnace. Marcus is instantly disintegrated, his essence becoming fuel for the furnace. With Marcus gone, Makina's bindings unravel, and Veltal reverts to his normal form. It's finally over. However, the ordeal and the fear of potentially losing Makina forever has taught Veltal an important lesson about the value of life. He realizes that Makina means more to him than anything else in the world and confesses his love for her, telling her that he loves her. Sometime later, we see a blonde girl sitting in her classroom, gazing out the window with a look of boredom, clearly dissatisfied with her mundane life. She glances over at a pair of girls in her class sporting exaggerated gigachad jawlines, and the moment they notice her looking, they waste no time hurling insults at her, calling her a loser in every way imaginable, all while maintaining their mewing routine. Just then, the teacher enters the room, announcing that the class will be welcoming a couple of new transfer students today. As the first exchange student steps forward to introduce himself, we see Veltal boldly declare his name, vowing to leave an unforgettable mark on the city. If you're wondering how we got here, after the incident with Marcus, Veltal and Makina's lives pretty much went back to normal. Veltal continues with his streaming career. He has just beaten the final boss of his speedrun campaign, and Makina has been cheering for him the whole time from the other room. Now that he's finally done, Veltal gloats over his victory to his viewers because they kept saying there was no way he would win. Although it did take him 3 days of non-stop gaming to finish a 10-hour game, so if he wasn't immortal, he'd probably be dead from sleep deprivation. In any case, his resilience has once again earned him a victory. So Veltal bids his viewers farewell and ends the stream. With his stream finally over, Makina steps into Veltal's room to congratulate him on successfully clearing the game. However, she gently reminds him to take a break at least once every 24 hours, noting that she hasn't had any time with him over the past 3 days. Veltal apologizes and promises to spend some quality time with her. On another note, Veltal and Makina are no longer living in her rundown apartment, which suggests that Veltal's channel is thriving. In fact, he just hit an impressive milestone of 3 million subscribers. To celebrate, Makina suggests they go out for sushi. Veltal appreciates the sentiment, but says there's no need to celebrate something as trivial as 3 million subs because the true milestone is the fact that his power has risen to the point where he can now access his dark sword's second form at will. Makina congratulates him on that as well and again asks if he would like to go out for sushi to celebrate. Veltal asks her if she really wants sushi that badly, but Makina says she doesn't particularly like sushi. Veltal is confused by this, but instead of asking her to explain, he just ignores her statement and goes back to talking about his sword's second form. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much use for it since his sword's second form was mainly used to execute immortals. With Marcus out of the picture, Veltal decides it's time to start searching for the other immortal dark peers who have gone missing. The ones still unaccounted for are Ralsheen, Sigwald, and May. Considering Marcus's personality, he would have definitely boasted if he had killed them, so it's reasonable to believe they are still alive somewhere. Veltal turns to Makina and asks if she's willing to help him with this daunting mission. Makina solemnly swears to do everything in her power to ensure their success. Now, as for how to find the other dark peers, Veltal recalls creating a dark peer record at one point before he was defeated. He asks Makina if she knows what happened to it. The dark peer records have all the mana signatures of the various dark peers engraved into them, so they automatically track their locations and activities. However, Makina explains that the records went missing a long time ago, so it's going to be really hard to find them now. Even so, Veltal is determined to locate the rest of his subordinates, no matter how long it takes. At that moment, the doorbell rings. Veltal and Makina go to answer it and find Takahashi standing there. Veltal is taken aback to see her wearing a school uniform, realizing she never mentioned being a high school student. He asks if it's really okay for her to be taking on such dangerous and illegal jobs while still in school. Takahashi, however, shrugs it off, saying there's nothing wrong with it as long as she doesn't get caught. She then changes the subject, mentioning that she watched Veltal's stream earlier and congratulates him on beating the game even if it did take him 3 days. Veltal is a little worried that his viewers might not like him streaming for so long, but Takahashi assures him that it's not that big of a deal. People usually just listen to long streams as background music, so as long as he posts some highlights every once in a while for those who can't watch the whole thing, he should be fine. She asks what game Veltal plans to stream next, but then there's an awkward silence since he doesn't plan on streaming for a while. Takahashi figures out that there's something Vall and Makina aren't telling her, so she starts whining about how unfair it is that they would keep secrets from a friend like her. Veltal eventually decides to bring Takahashi in on the mission, explaining that he's searching for an ancient magical artifact known as the Dark Pier Records. Takahashi lights up with excitement at the idea. Thrilled by the prospect of a treasure hunt, she assures Veltal that he can count on her to track down the records, confidently stating that her hacking skills will make it a breeze. She immediately starts scouring the internet, but Makina doubts it'll be that easy to find information on ancient techniques online. While Makina might have a point, Takahashi is confident in her unique methods for uncovering the information she needs. First, she searches through all the possible locations where the records could be, including collections, museums, and ruins. After cross-referencing the data, she finally locates the records in Akihabara City. It's one of the satellite cities of Shinjuku and is also home to the most prestigious magic academy in the world, Luzel. The school was established shortly after the Immortal War ended, and there are rumors of a treasure buried beneath it. However, the treasure vault has been sealed for over 500 years. The timing of the school's founding aligns with when the records went missing, leading Veltal to believe they must be hidden inside that vault. Makina suggests breaking in and taking the records by force, but Takahashi dismisses the idea as far too reckless. Instead, she proposes a more discreet approach, sneaking in undetected and stealing the records after she disables the security system. Veltal, however, comes up with an even better plan. If they're going to infiltrate the school anyway, why not enroll as students and blend in seamlessly? That idea sounds pretty fun to Takahashi, so she offers to forge the documents for them. Veltal officially declares that he will be going to school. The next day, they get their things ready and set out for Akihabara City. When they finally arrive, Veltal gets stuck at the immigration gate by a robot asking for his ID. Outraged, Veltal can't believe the robot doesn't already know who he is. He has 3 million subscribers. After all, he's just about to call for a manager. But Takahashi doesn't want to deal with any Karen outbursts from him, so she shows the robot her identification and drags him away so they can keep heading for the school. As soon as they step out of the station, Veltal's eyes light up with excitement. This city looks exactly like Alneath did in his time, flooding him with a wave of nostalgia. Known for its cutting-edge Meiji engineering, the city is famous for producing some of the finest magical prosthetics in the world, with performance capabilities that are nothing short of extraordinary. Such advanced technology would have been unimaginable during his era. While magical prosthetics are impressive on their own, the fact that they've progressed to the point where people can replace their entire bodies is beyond anything he could have envisioned. Takahashi chimes in, explaining that although full body replacements are technically possible, after the incident with David Martinez, people have opted for more moderate implants instead. The group moves on and eventually arrives at the doorstep of the Luzel Academy. Veltal is disappointed, as the school doesn't match the Alneath aesthetic the rest of the city has. They head inside and meet with Trat Godel, the principal of the Magical Academy, to officially be admitted. Trat is no ordinary person. She's the leader of one of the 3 great houses in the city, the Godels, and she pretty much runs half of Akihabara City. Takahashi isn't sure her forged documents will fool someone like Trat, so she's totally prepared to pull as much random nonsense as necessary to get Trat to accept them. However, to her surprise, after Veltal tells Trat his name, she just accepts the documents without any further questioning. Trat, however, has one question on her mind. She wants to know why Veltal decided to come to the school. Before Takahashi can come up with a lie, Veltal answers honestly, saying they're here to take a look inside the treasury beneath the school. Trat then asks why he's so interested in the treasury, to which Veltal replies that no secrets can elude his sharp eye. From there, he and Trat exchange remarks that go completely over Takahashi's head, but by the end of their conversation, Trat concludes that Veltal is just a cool guy with a casual interest in the treasury. She's fine with granting him access, but there's one big issue. The treasury has been sealed for the past 500 years. Veltal asks if it's possible to remove the seal. Trat explains that in order to undo the seal, the three houses, the Godels, the Seabirds, and the Reynards must agree and gather their regalias together to act as a key. The sword she's holding is one of the three regalias, known as Godel's Blade. To undo the seal, Veltal would need to acquire the Seabird's crown and the Reynard's orb. If he can manage to pull it off, Trat will gladly open the seal for him. To be honest, she's personally interested in seeing the contents of that vault herself. But there's one major obstacle. The Reynard's orb is currently missing. The group is soon introduced to Miss Mag, their new homeroom teacher, who escorts them to their new classroom. However, in line with the school's rules, Makina and Takahashi are required to remove their familiars. Takahashi finds it odd to be without her familiar since she's so accustomed to wearing it all the time. This school places a strong emphasis on traditional magic studies and strictly prohibits students from wearing familiars on campus. Veltal supports this policy, as he believes that while a familiar can be an incredible tool for daily life, true mastery of magic comes from learning to wield it without assistance. When they arrive at the classroom, Miss Mag tells them to come in one by one after she explains everything to the rest of the class. While the teacher is gone, Veltal asks Makina and Takahashi what they should do for their introductions. He recently played a game with a transfer student in it and discovered that having an impactful introduction is absolutely essential. When it's his turn, Veltal boldly introduces himself, and Makina and Takahashi follow suit in their own ways. After the introductions, Miss Mag asks Veltal to come forward so she can measure his magical power using a crystal for his class assessment. Veltal understands the need for the test, but warns her in advance that he's likely to break the crystal. Mag dismisses his concern, confidently assuring him that there's no way it will shatter. However, the moment Veltal uses it, the crystal, to her shock, does exactly that: it breaks. Meanwhile, Graham is seen wandering through the city, seemingly searching for something. After the incident with Marcus, he struck up a friendship with the secretary, and now she's assisting him in his quest to find his goddess. After the entire crystal incident, Mag decides to proceed with class as usual and begins her lecture on the risks associated with soul channeling, just as planned. However, she soon notices that Veltal is simply sitting there, staring at her with a smile on his face. This prompts her to pause and ask why he isn't taking any notes. Veltal, understanding her concern, reassures her that there's no need to worry about his studies, as he already has the entire topic fully memorized. Mag doesn't believe Veltal could possibly have memorized the entire history of soul channeling in one day, so she tries to prove him wrong by asking him about a very particular incident that happened centuries ago. But before she's even done asking the question, Veltal realizes she must be talking about the Railrod incident. During that era, Railrod was a court mage for the royal family, and he had been experimenting with the idea of channeling a hero's soul into his body. But at the same time, he found out that his wife invested his life savings in hot coin and got rug pulled, so he lost control, leading to a major disaster. The teacher cuts him off there since it's clear Veltal wasn't joking about having the history memorized. Veltal's response to the question captured the attention of everyone in the class, as he spoke with the kind of detail and confidence that made it seem like he had witnessed the event firsthand. Even the class outcast girl found him intriguing, though she preferred to keep her distance from flashy people like him. Later, during lunchtime, Hizuki is sitting by herself in the courtyard, as she usually does, still feeling a bit curious about Veltal and his friends, who seem quite odd to her. But out of nowhere, she is confronted by Albert Haygrams, who approaches her with the sole intention of mocking her. He mocks her for being completely talentless when it comes to magic and tells her she's a disgrace to the Reynard family. However, he doesn't stop with insulting her. He also calls her father a bum and her elf mother a fool for having a child like her. Now, me personally, I wouldn't let that kind of disrespect slide, and neither does Hazuki, because she slams her hands on her table and tells Albert that she won't allow him to slander the name of her parents like that. Albert doesn't see anything wrong with what he said, so he's about to continue his tirade of insults, but before he can utter another word, Veltal yells for him to be silent. Veltal was calmly enjoying a bowl of udon when Albert showed up and disrupted his peace with his hypocritical sense of superiority. Albert accuses Veltal of having no right to call him a hypocrite, pointing out that all Veltal does is play video games to earn money. However, while Albert dismisses streaming as a legitimate job, the fact that he knows about Veltal's channel suggests he must be one of his viewers. Seizing the moment, Veltal thanks Albert for helping boost his ad revenue. Albert, however, denies being a fan of Veltal's stream, insisting that as the eldest son of the Haygrams family, he would never lower himself to waste time on something so trivial. But now that Albert mentioned the Haygrams family name, Veltal remembers where he's heard that name before. He had met Albert's ancestor, Ganfall Haygrams, once before on the battlefield, but the second Ganfall saw him, he chose to run away in disgrace rather than die at the hands of Veltal. It seems that Ganfall's cowardice allowed him to survive long enough to create a family, but Veltal never could imagine that he would get to meet Ganfall's descendants in person. This has put Veltal in a good mood, so he decides to forgive Albert for ruining his udon. But he still doesn't understand why Albert was mocking Hazuki when she possesses even more talent than he does. Albert couldn't dispute Veltal's claim that his ancestor was a coward, as it was undeniably true. However, what he absolutely couldn't tolerate was Veltal implying that Hazuki was better than him. That was the final straw. Deciding enough was enough. Albert formally challenges Veltal to a duel to settle their differences once and for all. Meanwhile, Hazuki is left bewildered, wondering how things escalated to this point, especially since she never asked for Veltal's help in the first place. In the school stadium, Makina and Takahashi walk up to Hazuki. Takahashi doesn't know much about Hazuki, but it's clear no one likes her, so she asks what Hazuki did to be treated as such a loser. Hazuki explains that the other students don't like the fact that she is attending this school while being a failure of a student in theory. Hazuki's grades here are really good, but she can't use magic, so people tell her she has no place at a magic academy. Takahashi doesn't mean to be harsh, but she struggles to understand why Hazuki would go to all the effort of attending a magic academy when she can't even use magic. However, Hazuki has her own reasons for being there. Sensing the conversation turning a bit awkward, Makina quickly shifts the topic, expressing surprise that the school actually sanctioned the duel in the first place. Hazuki explains that one of the academy's primary goals is to train mages to excel in combat, so duels are not only allowed but actively encouraged, provided a teacher is there to supervise. And today, it seems that Mag has been assigned the less than ideal task of overseeing the duel. She asks Veltal and Albert to get this over with soon because the lunch break is going to end any minute now. They both agree to make this as quick as possible. But before the match begins, Veltal calls over to Hazuki and tells her to watch the match closely because she is about to witness his greatness. However, Albert tells Veltal to stop acting like he has already won the match since he is at a great disadvantage here. Out of everyone attending this school, Albert is the only person who received an A+ in mana release, mana manipulation, and mana reserves. To put it simply, Albert is considered the most powerful student at the academy. While Veltal can't comment on Albert's mana release or manipulation abilities since he hasn't witnessed them, he does note that, in terms of mana reserves, Hazuki far surpasses Albert. Hazuki, however, is baffled by this claim, pointing out that she received an F in her mana reserves evaluation, but Veltal insists that her reserves are truly incredible. Makina, trusting Veltal's judgment, believes the school must have made a mistake, as Veltal is never wrong about such things. Hazuki doesn't argue, but she can't help finding it odd how Makina treats everything Veltal says as absolute truth. Albert doesn't believe what Veltal said is true, so he tells him to just get ready for the fight to start. Veltal is more than ready. But he doesn't think it would be fair if he fought normally. So instead, he gives Albert a handicap and says he won't move an inch from his spot. Albert thinks Veltal is trying to make fun of him. But Veltal is so serious that he is willing to make an oath with Albert. If he loses the match or moves from his spot, then he will do whatever Albert says. But if he wins, Albert is forbidden from harassing Hazuki from now on. Hazuki can't understand why Veltal would go to such lengths for her when they hardly know each other. So she asks Makina to try and convince him to call off the match. While Albert may be insufferable, he genuinely is the strongest student at the academy, and she doesn't want Veltal to risk getting hurt on her behalf. However, Takahashi and Makina remain confident that there's no way Veltal could lose. Besides, it's already too late to back out. The terms of the oath have been agreed upon, and both Veltal and Albert have sworn on their names to honor it. The match officially begins, and Albert starts charging up his attack spell. But Veltal cuts him off in the middle of his chant and tells him this will be boring if he uses so little mana. He wants Albert to fire at him with everything he's got so he can at least have a little fun. Albert takes that personally and starts casting his spell at max power. Mag tries to calm Albert down since a spell of that level could actually kill someone. But Veltal tells her there's no need to worry since this is exactly what he wants to see. It's been a while since Veltal got to participate in an old-fashioned magic duel, so he wants to savor it a little. Albert fires his magic arrow, but, as expected, Veltal catches it effortlessly with one hand before it can reach him. Despite this, Veltal admits he's genuinely impressed by the sheer power Albert managed to pack into the attack, though it still wasn't enough to make him budge. Albert is stunned, unable to believe that Veltal caught one of his full-strength spells barehanded. Veltal acknowledges Albert's effort, telling him he should take pride in his abilities. As with another 200 years of training, he might even become a mildly challenging opponent. He then apologizes for his earlier disrespectful remarks about Albert's ancestor, explaining that he has newfound respect for the dedication Albert must have shown to reach his current level of strength in this era. As a reward, Veltal decides to demonstrate the true essence of magic, pointing a single finger at Albert and firing a shot of compressed mana, instantly knocking him out. Veltal is declared the winner of the duel, and once he leaves the stadium, he tells Hazuki that his victory is dedicated to her. Hazuki shyly thanks him but warns him to stay away from her since she's bound to cause trouble for him if he hangs around her. After school, Veltal, Takahashi, and Makina take a walk through the city. Takahashi talks about how surprising it is that there are still rich brats like Albert in a school like this. In fact, she can't stand the whole school in general since it doesn't allow her to have her familia and forces her to wear this uniform. She asks Veltal if he can simply use magic to open the vault himself and speed up the process. While it's technically possible, Veltal advises against it, explaining that ancient seals like that tend to self-destruct if forced open. They'll have to collect the regalia the hard way. Fortunately, with Trat already cooperating, the only remaining piece is the crown, which is currently held by the representatives of Electric Town. The real issue, however, is the missing orb. Finding a treasure with no leads on its location will be nearly impossible, but Veltal quickly corrects her, pointing out that they actually have a solid lead. The missing orb belongs to the Reynard family, and they just happened to meet the family's head earlier today. They can inquire about it later. For now, though, they have a more immediate matter to address as they've just arrived at their destination. This is the other side of Akihabara City, and it's Veltal's first time ever being here. Takahashi welcomes him to Electric Town. Veltal is amazed by how densely packed this part of the city is and is interested in exploring it since it reminds him of the labyrinths he used to build. But Takahashi stops him, warning that this place is a real tourist trap. Rumor has it that if you get lost, you could be stuck in there for days and come out broke. That's why Takahashi insists they need a guide who is familiar with the area. As luck would have it, Takahashi is a specialist when it comes to gathering information, so she says she knows the perfect place for them to go, a maid cafe. Veltal trusts Takahashi's judgment but begins to doubt whether this place is truly the best spot for gathering information about the regalia. Takahashi, however, confidently assures him that it's the perfect choice. People from all walks of life gather here, and the maid's penchant for gossip makes it easy to pick up useful tidbits. Realizing her reasoning, Veltal apologizes for doubting her, admitting he initially thought she had brought them here just for fun. In truth, Takahashi had indeed brought them here purely for her own enjoyment. Makina doesn't really mind spending time in a maid cafe, but something she does mind is the fact that the prices here are incredibly high. Takahashi suddenly starts yelling that those prices are necessary to give you the dream experience of being served by cheery maids. But Veltal and Makina don't see what's so special about it since they've lived most of their immortal lives as royalty. That aside, Veltal is still deep in thought over what happened earlier with Izuki. She seems like she's purposefully avoiding people, so trying to convince her to talk with them will probably make her avoid them even more. It's a shame since Makina actually likes Izuki quite a bit because she seems like a good person. Takahashi agrees with Makina's point but is starting to lose patience, eager to make the most of her time at the maid cafe. She cuts the conversation short and uses the request system to summon the maid with the most impressive talents. Moments later, their maid arrives, but to everyone's complete shock, it turns out to be Izuki, who is absolutely mortified to find her classmates sitting at her table. Izuki never imagined she'd run into these three again, let alone while dressed like this. However, Makina and Takahashi couldn't be happier with how things have played out. Even Veltal decides to join in on the fun, casually telling Izuki that he'd like to order the same thing as the table over there. He points to a group enjoying the Momo special performance with their meal, leaving Izuki internally cringing at the thought of performing that routine in front of her classmates. The sheer embarrassment seems unbearable. Makina assures her she doesn't have to do it if she doesn't feel comfortable, but Izuki is deeply committed to her role as a maid. If cuteness is what they're expecting, then cuteness is exactly what they're going to get. She heads to the kitchen to get their food ready, and once she returns, she does her best to give them the full maid cafe experience. But the entire time, she's internally screaming in embarrassment. Once they are done with their meal, Veltal and the others compliment Izuki on her excellent service. But since there's no one left in the store now, they tell her she can relax. Izuki doesn't waste a second and immediately sits down before taking Takahashi's drink to cool off. Getting straight to the point, Veltal asks Izuki to confirm if she's the head of the Reynard clan and informs her that he needs her regalia. When Izuki asks why he wants it, Veltal explains his plan. He's trying to unlock the treasure vault beneath the school and is collecting all the regalia to make it happen. Izuki says she wouldn't mind helping him, but unfortunately, she no longer has the regalia, so she can't hand it over. She goes on to explain that, because her regalia is missing, the Reynard family has essentially fallen into ruin, leaving her as nothing more than a poor student trying to get by with a part-time job. Takahashi is a bit curious, so she asks Izuki why the regalia are so important in the first place. Izuki explains that the regalia are objects that serve as proof of the owner's kingship. As she talks about it, her eye suddenly starts to hurt, and Veltal notices this, but Izuki goes on to finish her explanation. According to her parents, after the hero Graham defeated the demon lord 500 years ago, the goddess Meldia grew very fond of Graham and bestowed upon him the regalia, a large territory, treasures, and her blessing. However, Graham was eventually exiled by the king of the time because he was perceived as a threat. So before he left, Graham handed down the regalia and all his treasures to the man who had become king, Luzel II. Over time, Luzel entrusted the regalia to his 3 sons. However, the sons couldn't agree on how to share the wealth and power, leading them to form 3 rival factions, now known as the 3 Great Families. While the families generally avoid interfering with one another, some lingering resentment still exists, which has prevented them from ever uniting to unseal the treasure vault. And now, with the orb regalia missing, such unity seems even more unlikely. Izuki can't understand why Veltal even bothered asking her about it, given that he already knows it's gone. But Veltal actually had a different reason for wanting to talk to Hazuki. He asks her if she could get him in contact with Corny Seabird, and Hazuki thinks it should be easy enough to get Corny to meet with Veltal as long as she is with them. And since she still owes Veltal a favor for sticking up for her in school, she agrees to get a meeting with Corny for them. Takahashi is so happy that she starts hugging Hazuki to thank her. But then Hazuki's stomach starts growling since she hasn't eaten anything all shift, so she gets embarrassed. Veltal decides to take her to a different restaurant so she can get something to eat, but he is honestly surprised by how much food Hazuki can eat. Shifting the conversation, Makina remarks how impressed she is that Hazuki managed to arrange a meeting with Corny on such short notice, especially given that he's the most influential man in the city. Hazuki doesn't think she did anything particularly impressive, but mentions that she doesn't want to overwhelm Corny by showing up with too many people, so she insists she can only bring one person along. Veltal immediately volunteers, declaring that he'll be the one to go. With that settled, he takes a bite of one of the meat sandwiches and is thoroughly impressed. This place is famous for its incredible genetically modified meat, though the chicken and pork options are quite pricey, so most people opt for the beef. Makina is a little curious and asks Hazuki what kind of meat she's eating since it doesn't look like beef, so Hazuki explains that it's dragon meat. Both Veltal and Makina are a little disturbed by this since one of Veltal's subordinates and Makina's comrade was Silwald, the black dragon, so they are hesitant to eat meat from the same species as him. Hazuki asks if that means they are too scared to try it, but Veltal and Makina take that as a challenge and immediately take a bite out of 2 dragon meat sticks. Surprisingly, they actually like it. It feels like beef but tastes like chicken, so Makina starts wishing they had eaten some of Silwald's meat while he was still around since he would have just regenerated anyway. After they finish their meal, Takahashi and Hazuki are enjoying themselves when, out of nowhere, some cops approach them. These officers are there purely because they've recognized Hazuki and are looking to stir up trouble. They claim they're arresting her for suspicious activity, but before things escalate, Trat appears and calmly points out that Hazuki and the others are simply having a meal together, which, as far as she knows, isn't against the law. The officers targeted Hazuki because she lacks significant influence or authority, but Trat is someone they can't afford to cross, so they reluctantly back off for the time being. Once the officers are gone, Trat apologizes to everyone for that unsightly display by the officers, and Takahashi thanks her for getting them out of that mess. Trat tells them there's no need to thank her, but she's wondering what they are all doing out here. So Veltal tells her that Hazuki is just giving them a tour of Akihabara City. He then asks why Trat is out here. Trat explains that she came to meet with Professor Mag, but before that, she would like to have a brief discussion with Hazuki. Veltal picks up on the cue and suggests that Makina and Takahashi join him to grab some more snacks. With them gone, Hazuki and Trat finally have a chance to talk in private. Trat expresses how happy she is to see Hazuki surrounded by such good friends, but then shifts to the matter at hand. She reminds Hazuki that her previous offer still stands, should she wish to consider it. Hazuki tries to act like she doesn't know what Trat is talking about, so Trat reiterates that she wants to adopt Hazuki into her family. Hazuki says she can't accept the offer because if Trat took her in, then all the other nobles would turn against her. But Trat says she can handle that. She just wants Hazuki to be able to live a happy life. Hazuki appreciates Trat looking out for her, but she still can't accept the offer because she wants to protect the Reynard family name as much as possible for the sake of her parents. Trat accepts her decision, but she wants her to remember that she will always be on Hazuki's side no matter what. Trat has to leave, so she bids farewell to Hazuki, encouraging her to enjoy the time with her new friends. However, as Trat walks away, the pain in Hazuki's head flares up again. This time, Takahashi notices and asks if Hazuki is okay, though it's clear she's not. Still, Hazuki insists she's fine. Shortly afterward, Hazuki heads off to meet Corny with Veltal. Upon arrival, they are introduced to Corny's assistant, Meryl, who informs them that he'll escort them to Corny's office. First, though, he needs to perform a security check. Using his glasses, Meryl scans both of them, and after a moment, he clears them to proceed and meet Corny. Surprisingly, Corny turns out to be a blinged-out goblin, and Veltol voices his astonishment since all the descendants of Luzel were elves. He finds it strange that a goblin is the head of one of the great families. Hazuki tells Veltol to stop talking since he's being rude, but Corny isn't bothered by Veltol's comments. It isn't normal for a goblin to lead a family of elves. In fact, Corny used to be a regular old merchant, but he clawed his way up to his current position. His upbringing wasn't great, but he somehow ended up taking care of the former head of the Sibird clan, and eventually, before Corny even knew it, he was adopted into the family. That's enough about his past. For now, Corny shifts the focus to what Veltol wants from him. Veltol explains that he's here to ask about the regalia, which piques Corny's interest. With a snap of his fingers, Corny summons the crown regalia to show Veltol. Seeing how effortlessly Corny called it forth, Veltol assumes it must be some kind of soul armament. However, Corny corrects him, explaining that the crown, along with the other regalia, was created from fragments of the goddess Meldia's soul. Because of this, the regalia can be stored within the user's soul. Unless the wielder willingly gives it up or is killed, the regalia will never leave their side. Veltol asks if that means he can claim the crown if he kills Corny, and that puts everyone on edge. But Veltol says, it's just a prank, bro, so they all calm down. Veltol may have been joking about killing Corny to get it, but he does need the regalia. So he politely asks Corny if he'd be willing to let him borrow it. He needs it to open the treasure vault since the item he's looking for might be in there. Normally, Corny would never agree to something like that. But since Hazuki was the one who brought him here, he decides to trust Veltol a little. Even if Corny were to hand over the regalia, it wouldn't serve any purpose. To unlock the vault, one must possess all three regalia and undergo the process of becoming the true king of the city. This would reunite the fragments of the goddess Meldia's soul within a single body, essentially summoning Meldia herself. Corny then expresses a desire to speak with Veltol privately and asks everyone else to step outside for a moment. Once they're alone, Corny presses Veltol to reveal his true intentions. In return, he promises to share everything he knows. This is a matter he doesn't want Hazuki to overhear, so he asks Veltol to keep it confidential. The missing orb regalia is somewhere close by. Corny can't pinpoint the exact location, but as a regalia wielder, he can sense the presence of the other regalia as long as they are within Akihabara city. He wants Veltol to do him a favor and protect Hazuki to the best of his abilities since, even though she tries to act tough, she can be surprisingly weak at times. Corny cares about Hazuki a lot since he owes her father a huge debt. Unfortunately, her father died before he could repay him, so the least Corny can do is keep the man's daughter safe for him. As for the missing orb, Corny's records on the Reynard family indicate that Hazuki inherited it at a young age, meaning it is likely bonded to her soul. This makes Hazuki the key to locating it. A short time later, Veltol and Hazuki rejoin Makina and Takahashi. Veltol is pleased to announce that he has secured Corny's cooperation. While Corny hasn't technically handed over the crown yet, he provided Veltol with some critical information, making the meeting a success, and it's all thanks to Hazuki. Hazuki is a little embarrassed to be receiving so much praise, so she turns away in embarrassment. Since their main objective for the day has been completed, Takahashi asks what they should do now. Makina was thinking of going to buy some Demon Lord comics, and Veltol was thinking of going to an arcade, but Takahashi tells them it's too late to start doing all of that. She would normally suggest they head back to the school dorms right about now, but since Hazuki is here, she suggests they all sleep over at Hazuki's house. Makina thinks it's a fantastic idea and asks Veltol if he's on board with it. Veltol says he doesn't mind staying at Hazuki's house, but Hazuki quickly points out that she never agreed to any of this. Takahashi tries to persuade her, suggesting it's a perfect chance for them to bond and get to know each other better. Hazuki finds herself warming to the idea and reluctantly agrees to let them stay over. However, just a few hours later, she's deeply regretting her decision because somehow she's ended up naked in the bath with Veltol. Hazuki has struggled with an issue in her right eye for quite some time. For reasons that remain a mystery, she blacks out momentarily whenever someone comes near her. When she comes to, she always finds that she has hurt someone. This led to her attacking her very first friend without meaning to, and was also the cause of her parents' tragic deaths. As a result, Hazuki is extremely wary of allowing anyone to get too close to her. When she first brought the others back to her mansion, Makina prepared a meal for them, and Takahashi proposed a toast to celebrate their new friendship. Hazuki is impressed by how well Makina can cook, but Makina thinks it's normal to have this level of cooking skills since she has been practicing for decades now. Hazuki is a bit confused and is about to ask how Makina could possibly have decades of experience when she's only a high schooler, but Takahashi changes the subject and suggests that they should hold a video game tournament to pass the time. Veltal is all for the idea, being a video game streamer, but Hazuki is reluctant to go along with it. Veltal teases her, suggesting she's just afraid to take on the great Veltal in a virtual showdown, but Hazuki sees this as a direct insult. Determined to prove him wrong, she completely crushes him with a flawless 10-0 victory. The others are blown away by Hazuki's incredible skill, and she can't help but feel a sense of pride. However, she soon realizes that she's starting to get a little too close to the group, which raises the risk of another incident. Still, she's enjoying herself too much to let the feeling ruin the moment, so she decides to push the worry aside for now. A little while later, Makina and Takahashi both fall asleep, so Hazuki decides to go take a bath. However, as she turns on the lights in the bathroom, she discovers that Veltal is already there. Veltal doesn't seem bothered and believes Hazuki must have come here because she wanted to get a glimpse of his perfect body. So, just this once, he will allow her to gaze upon his godly physique. Hazuki doesn't know what to say in this situation, and she can't even get mad since she was the one who walked in on Veltal. She says she'll leave and wait for him to finish, but Veltal tells her there's no need for that since he has no problem bathing with Hazuki. After all, he thinks her body is quite nice, but his is still superior. Once again, Hazuki takes it as a personal slight and decides to prove him wrong by shedding her towel and stepping into the bath with him. After the initial awkwardness begins to fade, Hazuki asks Veltal about his earlier conversation with Corny. Veltal explains that Corny had only shared some details about Hazuki's predicament and how she came to inherit the regalia. Curious, Hazuki presses him further, asking why he's bothering to get involved with her. Like when he stepped in to help her in the cafeteria, she wonders if he's only being kind because she's the leader of the Reynard family, but Veltal assures her that when they first met, he had no idea who she was. He just couldn't stand the stuck-up brat who was giving her trouble. However, now Veltal thinks of her as a cherished friend, so he would help her without hesitation if the need ever arose. He thinks she's really impressive since, despite everything that has happened, she has still managed to keep her house in order, and she's really good at video games too since she beat him so easily. He asks her if she had fun today, and she did. So, she swims over to Veltal's side to be closer to him. Since Hazuki is finally opening up to him, Veltal asks her about the picture frame she had in the living room since it's clear she was trying to keep something secret. Hazuki is reluctant to bring it up, but since she trusts Veltal, she decides to share her story. Years ago, when Hazuki was just a young girl, she woke up on her birthday filled with excitement to celebrate with her parents. That day, they took her out shopping, doing everything they could to make it a truly special occasion for her. However, unbeknownst to Hazuki, they were being watched by many hateful eyes, as there were those who disapproved of her parents' marriage. Her parents took her out to all sorts of fun locations to give her the best birthday experience possible. But when they sat down in a park to blow out the candles for Hazuki's cake, they were suddenly attacked. All three of them were violently stabbed, and while Hazuki managed to survive, her parents weren't so lucky. They both died that day. Hazuki fully blamed herself for the incident. During the funeral, Corny and Trat were quietly conversing at the back of the procession. Corny voiced his concerns about Hazuki, noting that the records of the incident indicated she had inherited the orb regalia after her parents' deaths. However, it appeared that Hazuki herself was unaware of this fact. They agreed to keep her in the dark for her own protection, not wanting those who had targeted her parents to set their sights on her as well. As for why Hazuki chose to remain in Akihabara despite all the scorn and ridicule she endured, it was because this was her parents' home. If it weren't, she would have left this place far behind long ago. Veltal thanks her for sharing her past with him, and Hazuki honestly feels a lot better after talking about it. But she asks Veltal if he's willing to stick by her no matter what happens from here on out. After they are done with their bath, Veltal and Hazuki get dressed and start walking back to the others. But all of a sudden, Veltal grabs Hazuki's shoulder and stops her because there's an intruder in the room. He demands that the intruder reveal himself. So a holographic projection appears and introduces itself as a hero from the New World Church named Faceless. Faceless states that it has come to negotiate and requests that Veltal and his friends leave Akihabara City at once. Since Veltal managed to defeat one of their former members, Marcus, they recognize him as a formidable threat and wish to avoid any unnecessary conflict. Faceless assures him that neither he nor his friends will be harmed as long as they agree to leave peacefully. As a gesture of goodwill, the New World Church even offers to assist him in unsealing the treasury vault he had been seeking. However, Veltal immediately rejects that idea because he would never abandon Hazuki. Furthermore, he finds it insulting that Faceless dares to call himself a hero since, as far as Veltal is concerned, there is only one person that has the right to call himself a hero, and that is Graham. Faceless can see that negotiation won't work with Veltal, so he gives up on trying to settle this amicably and decides to take his leave. Before leaving, Faceless declares that no matter what Veltal tries, he won't be able to stop the New World Church from transforming the city forever. As he speaks, Hazuki manages to get a clear look at Faceless and is horrified to see the same emblem she had witnessed the day her parents were killed. The hologram then vanishes, but Hazuki remains frozen in fear, deeply shaken by what she has just seen. Elsewhere in the city, Trat goes to visit Corny at his office because there's something she wants to discuss with him. Corny assumes she is here because of the incident that happened with Maguro, but before he could even ask any questions, Trat slices his head off and says she is here to steal his crown regalia. News quickly spreads across the city as the death of the leader of the Seabird family is a big deal, especially since he was murdered by the leader of the Godel family. Hazuki can't believe it, since she knows Trat would never do something like this, so she goes to see her and ask about it. At the same time, an announcement echoes through the school, informing everyone that an emergency lockdown is being enforced and instructing them to gather in the assembly hall. Veltal and the others immediately sense that something isn't right, but since they can't pinpoint what it is, they decide to go along with it for now. Meanwhile, Hazuki arrives in Trat's garden and confronts her, demanding to know if the rumors about her killing Corny are true. Trat attempts to soothe Hazuki, assuring her there's nothing to worry about, but she slips by addressing Hazuki as Reynard. This small detail instantly makes Hazuki realize that this isn't the real Trat. Back at the assembly hall, a woman appears in front of the crowd and immediately casts a spell that stabs 4 students through the chest. This spell allows her to seize control of the students' bodies, and she demands that the rest of the students all stay still because she's holding them hostage. At the same time, the fake Trat is disappointed that her act was seen through because of such a silly mistake. But since there's no way she's going to fool Hazuki now, she drops the act and reveals that she is really Mag. Hazuki is baffled by why Mag would commit such a horrible act, prompting Mag to explain that her guild assigned her the mission of acquiring all 3 regalia, and she's simply carrying out her duty. The most challenging part, she admits, was getting to Corny, as he was always extremely cautious about his security. However, he had a weakness: he tended to lower his guard whenever he was speaking with Trat. Mag decided to exploit this vulnerability. Not long ago, she tricked Trat into entering a cybernetic surgery clinic, where she extracted Trat's mind from her body, allowing Mag to take over both the body and the regalia. Immediately after, she killed Corny to claim his regalia as well. Hazuki asks what happened to Trat's mind, but Mag didn't really care about keeping Trat alive, so she's probably long dead by now. Hizuki breaks down at the realization that two of her closest friends are dead, but Mag doesn't give her any time to grieve and says she needs Hizuki to cooperate with her so she can complete her mission. Hizuki immediately refuses to help Mag in any way and turns to leave, but Mag warns her that there will be consequences if she doesn't do as she is told. She then displays a video of the assembly hall showing Makina's decapitated head on the ground and threatens to have Veltal and Takahashi killed as well if Hizuki doesn't obey. Hizuki realizes she has no other options left and asks if Mag plans to kill her and take the orb. However, Mag quickly corrects her, revealing that her true goal is to use Hizuki to summon the goddess Meldia. She traps Hizuki within a summoning circle and begins explaining that the three regalia were always meant to be used for this purpose, contrary to what Hizuki believes about the orb being lost. Mag reveals that it's already present. Moreover, the soul of Meldia has also been here all along, hidden without Hizuki ever realizing it. During the merging of the two worlds, Meldia was meant to disappear since she would no longer be able to maintain herself as a higher being. However, she avoided this fate by lowering the rank of her soul and transferring it to an infant. The reason Mag knows this is because she was the one who killed Hizuki's parents, and on that day, Meldia's power briefly manifested to fend her off, which is why Hizuki survived. Back in the assembly hall, Veltal places a hand on Albert's shoulder and uses telepathy to communicate with him. Knowing Albert is the most capable student present, Veltal asks for his help to break the spell controlling the students at the front. They only have one shot at this, so once Takahashi gives the signal, they cut the power to the lights. Using his physical enhancements, Veltal breaks the spell on two of the students, while Albert handles the other two. Meanwhile, Makina takes down the magician holding the students hostage, ensuring everyone's safety for the time being. However, Veltal quickly realizes that Hizuki was likely the true target of this attack. He leaves Albert in charge of the students and takes to the air, determined to save Hizuki. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, the summoning ritual is already underway, and it's too late. Hizuki's body has been completely taken over. When Veltal arrives, Mag seems slightly disappointed, knowing his presence will prevent her from fully executing her plan. However, she quickly reassures herself that it's not a total loss, as war will still descend upon the city regardless of what Veltal does. With that, she decides to retreat for now. Veltal approaches Hizuki, asking if she's okay, but the figure before him is no longer Hizuki, it is the goddess Meldia. The hero was sitting at the rooftop of a tall building watching the crowd beneath him. Actually, there were two large groups of people on the street below. One group demanded the other to hand over Trat while swearing that the other group would pay for having killed Corne. As for the other group, they said that Lady Trat would never do such a thing, but the people from the first group didn't believe them. At that moment, Kinohara asked him if he would stop them since that was what heroes were supposed to do. Still, before he could reply, the city was engulfed by a yellow light, signaling the awakening of the goddess Meldia. Back with our protagonist, Meldia introduced herself as the ruler of joy and misfortune, and one of the 6 great gods. Right after, she demanded Veltal to know his place since his head was held too high. Of course, she recognized our protagonist as the Demon Lord despite that being the first time they had met in person. Right after, they began to mock each other cleverly. In fact, our protagonist went as far as to ask her if she had no pride as a god since she had taken a mortal vessel. Obviously, that pissed her off. Then she simply replied that he was a loathsome man before adding that she hated him for being a black-haired man since all men should be blonde. Immediately thereafter the battle began, and she insta killed Veltal. But luckily, thanks to his 3 million subs, his regeneration ability was currently top tier. Of course, she didn't waste the opportunity to make fun of him for being weak. After all, she had made an enemy of all gods on Alneath and had fought the hero Graham. The fight resumed, but the goddess clearly had the upper hand, to the point of being able to suppress our protagonist's immortality. At that point, he had to accept the powerful capabilities of the mythic armament forged from a goddess soul fragment. Nevertheless, thanks to their previous exchanges, he managed to see through her. She granted fortune to her attacks and defense, and misfortune to our protagonist's ones. In the end, she was truly a god, which meant she was a cheater. After all, in her prime, she used that divine power to change the hero's fate. She erased his inevitable aging and drastically changed his life. That triggered something within her, and she began to repeatedly apologize since she didn't want Graham to suffer due to her decision back then. Almost immediately, Hizuki regained control of her body and screamed with all her might, asking our protagonist to help her, to which he agreed. Right after, Meldia regained control. Back with Makina, she kept fighting the masked woman who wore none clothes. But after a pause, Makina asked her if they had met before, to which the other replied by saying that her code name was Ange. Makina then introduced herself and the battle resumed. Shortly after, Machine tricked the masked woman by using Marcus' blood bomb skill and beheaded her. Nevertheless, almost immediately, the masked woman regenerated herself, but that time she was not wearing her mask, which allowed Machine to recognize her as her friend May. Unfortunately, May seemed to have lost her memories, but before either of them could do anything, something began to happen with May's body, and a dark orb appeared above her head while she screamed in pain. That orb began to swallow everything nearby like a black hole, and shortly after, May, who seemed to have regained control of her body, was ready to throw it towards Makina. However, at that moment, the false Strat Akamag Rosanta appeared behind her and knocked May out. Makina demanded Mag to hand over May, but the other refused since the higher-ups liked the prototype despite being old. Referring to May, immediately thereafter, Mag disappeared along with May. Back with our protagonist, he kept fighting Meldia, but the goddess kept having the upper hand thanks to her ability to manipulate fortune and misfortune. However, after a while, he could understand the true nature of Meldia's power. Attacks that followed the laws of physics could be nullified, while magical attacks with high ether levels were diverted. She automatically nullified physical hits, but needed to manually evade ether attacks, which meant that he could harm her. Nevertheless, she didn't care about that and simply wanted to kill our protagonist so she could finally see the hero once again. Veltal then asked her what she sought in that world, to which she replied that she wanted to know how he felt and to apologize to him. After hearing that, he mocked her for not knowing how the hero felt, and when she tried to retort, he cut her off, saying that he was sure that after Meldia found out what had happened to the hero after she granted him eternal youth, she had regretted it, and had been dragging her feet on what to do ever since. In the end, she was nothing but a blushing maiden. That startled her. But he wasn't finished yet. He quickly added that what Meldia felt for the hero was not simply affection, but love. She was in love with him. Moreover, for Veltal, it was completely obvious how the hero felt about the goddess' actions. After hearing that, Meldia replied that she was aware that the hero hated her, but our protagonist mocked her again, asking her if that was the extent of her knowledge about Graham. That pissed the goddess, who demanded him to tell her how the hero truly felt, but he replied that he would do it after she released Hizuki, since a goddess stealing the body of a young girl was what the hero would hate the most. That was more than what she could take, and she began to cry while calling the hero's name. Veltal then told her that it was enough before adding that, at the very least, he would take that sentiment in his stead. Right after, he called Hizuki. Immediately thereafter, Hizuki and Meldia began to have a verbal fight over who deserved to control the girl's body. In the end, Hizuki asked again our protagonist to help her, and Meldia finally regained control of the body, so her battle against Veltal resumed once again. Nevertheless, something triggered at that moment which surprised Veltal. As for Mag, who was nearby while carrying the unconscious May, she confirmed that she had been right to prepare the Hubrists as insurance against the Demon Lord. Then she added that it was about time she took her leave before that city got blown to pieces. Back to the fight, Meldia assumed a second form, which in the end was taken by Veltal as normal since tough bosses in video games were also like that. The battle then resumed, but the goddess was way more powerful than before, and our protagonist was hit hard. Luckily, the hero appeared to help him. and Graham didn't miss the chance to tease Veltal since he looked terrible. The hero then noticed Meldia and asked our protagonist who she was, to which Veltal replied that she was just a lovesick maiden worrying about her crush and going on a rampage. Graham then asked if he should do something, but our protagonist replied that she was a friend of him and that he had promised to help her. Sadly, in her current state, Veltal couldn't get close to her alone, so he asked Graham to back him up, to which the hero agreed. Right after, Meldia launched several attacks while Veltal and Graham teamed up in order to get close to her. They both had great synergy, with Graham blocking the attacks and Veltal swiftly advancing. In fact, Graham ended up throwing Veltal toward Meldia, who was astonished after seeing the hero, an opening that was used by our protagonist to stab her in her chest, canceling her second form. Shortly after, Meldia regained consciousness while in Veltal's arms, and he informed her that the sword he had used to stab her was capable of cutting through souls, which meant that the goddess would soon disappear. However, our protagonist told Meldia that she should have more faith in the hero, before adding that the man she had chosen and loved could never hate her. That touched her, and she ended up crying in her last moments while thanking and apologizing to Veltal and Hazuki. As for our protagonist, he bid her farewell. Right after, Hazuki regained consciousness and began to cry. Almost immediately, Takahashi called and Veltal told her that everything was okay, to which she replied by informing her that everything was also okay on her end. Unfortunately, the city was a few seconds away from turning into a war zone, and she wanted to know what they should do about it. Veltal then said that he wouldn't allow that, before telling Hazuki that she still had a role to play. Shortly after, she appeared with her in the middle of the people who were ready to start fighting and informed them that there was a decree of the new king of Akihabara city. Nevertheless, many of the present didn't accept Hazuki's authority, but she didn't care and introduced herself as the new king of the city while showing everybody the regalia. Still, a lot of people weren't willing to accept her as their king and even began to blame her for what was happening. That made her almost surrender, but Veltal grabbed her by her waist, which made her embarrassed, and gave her the strength to speak to the people and explain to them what had happened and how some villains had plotted against them. Of course, she didn't forget to emphasize that since she was the owner of all three regalia, she now commanded full authority over the city. Then, as her first command, she abolished all royal authority the regalia had over the city, which meant that as of that moment, the city no longer had a king, and that the future management of the city would be entrusted to the city council. Afterward, Takahashi, Veltal, Makina, and Hazuki finally entered the vault that was full of treasures and gold. Nevertheless, while Takahashi was elated after seeing all the good stuff, Hazuki was surprised after confirming the real identities of Veltal and Makina. Sometime later, at their apartment, Veltal told Makina that he was glad to know that Siddelwald the Black Dragon and May of the Mournful Firmament were still alive, to which Makina agreed by saying that it had been well worth their time. After all, they had even gotten a brief taste of school life. Shortly after, Takahashi arrived with Hazuki since Makina wanted to celebrate Hazuki's transfer. As for our protagonist, he wanted to have a revenge match with her. In the video game, of course. Sometime later, a defeated Veltal was on the terrace lamenting, and when Hazuki appeared to keep him company, she asked her how was her new school, to which she replied that it was better than the last one, especially since Takahashi was there too. Not to mention that her speech back in Akihabara had made her famous. In fact, Veltal revealed that his subscriber count had gone up thanks to that. Still, for some reason, there had been some backlash too. At that moment, Meldia's soul awakened and thanked Hazuki, who then thanked Veltal for forgiving her. Immediately thereafter, Takahashi informed them that the final match would be Hazuki against Makina, with the former getting pumped and the latter wanting to avenge Lord Veltal. By the way, the match for last place was between our protagonist and the hacker. Watch this next video on screen and subscribe to not miss next part.